Welcome back to Ranked. I'm Charles.
I'm McCurdy.
I'm Nanz.
All right, well, in the wake of Casino, I'm just going to get to it. You guys good with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. It's Quantum of Solace. In the wake of the grandeur of Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace is something of a letdown.
Is that it?
Do you get what I'm doing? I'm doing like a meta thing. Like my opening rant is something of a letdown too. Like it's funny, you know. It's like kind of funny. It's kind of meta.
Explain the joke. Got it.
I'm disappointed.
Because it's a letdown. Because it was
You
the movie.
you thought I was gonna do a thing.
Nothing about dolphin humanoids or anything. Nothing.
I didn't. No.
Not a Chucky Rants. Nothing.
Subverting expectations.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Is that funny?
Huh.
No.
Oh. Hello, boys. We're back. Do you want to actually hear like a half rant? Like
Sure.
kind of a rant?
A little
I'll
bit
take
of
a rant.
Just a slight
Okay.
rant.
It's going to be a low-key rant. Okay. I understand that this movie is flawed, but I also believe it to be criminally underrated. There are details and decisions that either don't work or are outright mistakes, so it's messy, but the overall story is sound and sometimes profound. It's more of a sequel than we've ever had, as it is a direct continuation of action following Casino Royale. It's the first time we've had a Bond movie that requires a previous movie in order for it to make sense. And I think this is why it is so hated, because it is intimately attached to the beloved Casino Royale. We'll talk about the form of the film, which at times is way too cutty and falls back on the old, what do we do now? I don't know, how about a chase scene trope from Tomorrow Never Dies and Live and Let Die? But setting aside form for now, let's talk content. Fortunately, the story elements underneath those surface level presentation issues give the movie some merit, as Bond is reeling after love of his life Vesper's betrayal and suicide in the last film. Now the ice in his veins guy, he sets out to find the men responsible and bring them to justice. Just like Golden Gun's Bond, this Bond is a asshole, beating up or killing everybody that crosses his path and chugging alcohol whenever he can find it, while never losing that James Bond stoicism. His killing trail brings him face to face with Dominic Green, a colleague of Mr. White from the last film, both being members of Quantum, the same organization that contracted Lashif to do their dirty work. This time they've tricked the Americans into doing their dirty work by promising them oil, the black gold that makes today's mechanized world go round, in exchange for neutralizing Bond and allowing Green to affect a mutually beneficial regime change in Bolivia. And the Brits agree. They don't care if they have to support tyrants in some third world hole so long as their oil-backed economies remain strong. And that's the hard decision that those in power have to make on a regular basis, while those not in power post no blood for oil memes to Twitter with an iPhone from a Starbucks. Politics and foreign policy are not that simple, and whether we like it or not, literally everything we do goes back to oil because we have yet to invent the Solace. So the West plays ball with Quantum, unaware that they are actually being played, that there is no oil to begin with. Quantum is in fact seeking control of Earth's other precious liquid, water. This is all very real-world stuff that goes well beyond the typical good versus evil cartooniness that generally plagues Bond and solidifies this new Craig-era's bid for a more realistic approach to 007. Meanwhile, Bond's quest for revenge is mirrored by Camille's. It's Camille, but I'm going to say Camille this whole time. Camille, our Bond girl, literally scarred by her past, looking to take out Medrano, the corrupt general colluding with Quantum for control of the Bolivian government and the man responsible for murdering her family. However, when all's said and done and Bond finally finds the man who started all of this, Vesper's boyfriend, the man whose kidnapping led to her being blackmailed into betraying Bond and her country, it turns out all along he was just another agent of Quantum. Finally able to forgive Vesper and himself, Bond spares his life, taking him into custody instead of taking his revenge. Overall, it may not have the masterful flair that only our Lord and Savior Marc Campbell can bring to Bond, but so far as this is a meaningful follow-up, Quantum of Solace is just that. A small amount of comfort and consolation in a time of pain and regret. The chaser to the expensive vodka that was Casino. It may not make you feel the same way, but it brings catharsis and closure to that initial burn. Bond may have become Bond right at the end of Casino, but it's this movie that solidifies that transformation once and for all. Just FYI, for anybody who's unaware, this show began because, for those of y'all who remember Scotty Doo, Scooty Scoot Scoot, he texted us one day and was just like, I'm going to watch Quantum of Solace, that piece of shit. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And it sparked this whole debate, and then after starting this, there's frequently a lot of hate for this movie. And I think somebody's got to stand up for it because I see the flaws. But you know me, I'm all about bad guy and story. And those elements shine through, even though there might be a couple of, call them missteps and boo-boos, zits on this. That stuff is still really smart. Like, the script is intelligent, regardless of really nitpicking some things. So I think somebody has to stand up for this movie. That's going to be me. But in the meantime, McCurdy, could you enlighten us? Could you give us a quantum of knowledge regarding...
I'll give you a quantum
assault
mania of knowledge.
Oh, no, don't bring Ant-Man into this.
All right, let's talk about Quantum of Solace, shall we? So before Casino Royale was ever even in production, they had already started writing this story because they already knew that Casino Royale was going to lead into whatever this movie was going to be. They didn't have a title for it yet. So Eon goes to writing team Neil Purvis and Robert Wade. Again, we talked about forever ago. They started, I believe, with World Is Not Enough as being like their main go-to writers, and they still are their main go-to writers. And they had already cracked a story for the Fallout film. This was so they could tell Bond's emotional story after the death of Vesper, much like Chuck just laid out for us in this opening. In this version, the version that they had originally written, Bond was to let Mr. White go in Sienna, and he would follow him to find his organization, whatever that organization may have been. And Paul Haggis, who did the rewrites on Casino, finished his rewrites only 2 hours before the 2007-2008 writer's strike. Now, why is this such a big deal? Because this writer's strike, which is weird because we're talking about this now, this is like right when we were seniors in high school, but this kind of had changed a lot of movies coming out of that writer's strike, because when you don't have writers to back your films up, or even when you're in the process of making the movie, you can't make changes on the fly as easily.
It ruined a lot of good stuff. It wreaked havoc with everything. Like, anything that you liked at the time, there's still this scar there. Like, oh, you like that show Lost?
Yeah. There's season 4, there's not as many episodes.
Writer strike comes along and it leaves this rift, and it's tragic, especially right after Casino, to kneecap this movie right away.
Which sucks because you're trying to start basically they're rebooting this franchise. So they kind of have to start from scratch a little bit. And it's unfortunate this happened right when they're making their next movie, which is really like, I think, what was it? Steve Jobs said something like, it's not the first product that's the hit, it's the second one that's really going to say if the product or whatever you're putting out there is going to be a success, because that's really going to be the focal point of like, oh yeah, they can keep hitting home runs.
You're not a one-hit wonder.
Yeah. Neil and Robert Wade, they'll write the script as a team. They write the script, and then someone, either the director of that movie or another writer, in this case it was Paul Haggis, would write like another draft of that script that they'd written. So he's like the third person. And that original script was going to be Sleep. I think it was called Sleep for the Dead.
Do you think they'll be able to sleep now?
I don't think the dead care about vengeance.
Was the original title for that script. And that script,
was it Another Way to Die?
Another way to die.
Unfortunately, it wasn't. No. So he wrote that script, and it was just let me lay out the writer's strike, what it was about. So basically at that point, now we're living in this time where like new media is what's called new media, or streaming is very prevalent. We have streaming Netflix, HBO Max, whatever it might be. Heck, I mean, I watched Quantum today on HBO Max, so I'm watching it via streaming. But at the time, there wasn't any new rules for residuals for writers for anything that was streamed, especially if it was written specifically for online. So they were wanting that, as well as a better deal on DVD residuals. So that was all going on right before this. And so then they had to go on all of the WGA, all of the Writers Guild of America went on strike. And the script that they had for the sequel to Casino, they had finished it like literally 2 hours before they were like, yep, we're striking. Like, got to stop working. You can't touch anything. So that was what they had to go off of doing this film. Originally, director Roger Mitchell was announced to direct the sequel. Mitchell is probably best known for the films such as Notting Hill and Enduring Love, but later he had directed Kragen. Mitchell left the project, whatever the sequel is going to be, because they didn't call it Quantum just yet, because the script was taking too long. It was waiting. They should have had this probably done or ready to go by 2006, because they had the idea of what the script was going to be before they even started making Casino.
You have to wonder when the title did ultimately change, because Quantum of Solace is technically a Bond title from the books. It was a short story. So in what order did it change? The organization is Spectre, but they can't say Spectre, so they say Quantum, but did they only do that after they decided on Quantum of Solace? And then it was like, how about the name of the organization is Quantum, which comes from the, it's kind of like a confused thing. In the end, I think it works, but you have to wonder the order of events. What did they call it before they called it Quantum would be my question.
Why can't they say Spectre?
It wasn't until after they did Casino that I think McClory may have passed away like right when that movie came out or right after or whenever, but it wasn't till then. And then there was some legality of who owned the rights to Thunderball, which led into who owned the rights to who could say Spectre, who couldn't say Spectre, because Spectre was a product out of Thunderball. So they couldn't say that. Going back to the books, Casino Royale ends with him learning about Schmersh, not about Spectre. Spectre didn't come into play till Thunderball. So if you're like, okay, well, we're going to still adapt Casino, there's some organization that leaves you with an open-ended thing like, we can't say Spectre at this moment. Well, we'll put a filler in there. And then they're like, well, you call it Quantum. So anyway, Mikey G. Wiz and Barbara Broccoli decide on Marc Forster to direct. Up until this time, Forster had directed films such as Monster Ball with Charlie's favorite actress, Halle Berry, Finding Neverland, and Stranger Than Fiction. So not really any action films. However, Forster thought Casino was way too long, and it was he who wanted this film to be tighter than Chucky Rant's butthole when a Baskin-Robbins joke is being shoved in.
Dude, I can't put in Ant-Man jokes into this episode because nobody's going to know what the you're talking about.
Anyway, that all being said, yeah, this movie, if most people don't know, I believe is the shortest Bond movie. It's an hour and 46 minutes. Huh. Most Bond films are like 2 hours plus. This one is
like 210, 215.
Yeah, this one's short. I mean, most of the movies that you see in theaters generally will go 90 minutes, 100 minutes. It's a really easy, breezy time. It's not too long. It's not too short. But this movie runs in that gambit of 146, which is weird. I look
forward to hearing your thoughts on it, because last episode you kept complaining that Casino's too long. So I don't want to be hearing this is too short. You know what I mean?
All right. This movie's too short. I honestly, I don't really have opinion either way about the length of the film.
It's like somebody should make a
context,
fan edit where you combine both of them.
I wonder if there's like a channel for that. Forrest wanted all the action sequences to revolve around the 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire, heart, go planet. The title comes from the short story in Fleming's For Your Eyes Only. I'll let Charlie elaborate.
I always urge everybody to read all of these books. If you like these movies, you should read all the books.
Check them out in the description below.
Yeah, use our affiliate links. I almost don't even want to spoil what it is because it's so odd. It is just not a Bond story. It has nothing to do with this. It is completely different from anything Fleming ever wrote, but he's just telling a story about a really bad marriage. That's it. It's just kind of weird. So the title, I think, is fantastic. You need to break out a dictionary when you're, when you're a kid and this movie comes out, you're like, what's a quantum and what's a solace?
But
once you put together what it is, it's a small, like I said in the opener, it's a small amount of consolation, basically, which is perfect following Casino Royale. And so Marc Forster is obviously an intelligent dude. I never put together what you just said, but I think that's brilliant. Action sequences following the 4 elements. It's great.
Dominic Green, CEO of Green Planet. It's a utility company, but Green's been doing a lot of philanthropic work, buying up large tracts of land for ecological preserves.
Specifically because it's a story about natural resources.
You don't need another Marxist giving national resources to the people, do you?
Yeah. And as the more I read about this movie, the more I found that Marc Forster, as much as this movie gets on, and I think it kind of does, but you do realize that he was trying really hard to make this movie as best as you can. Like, nobody goes out of their way to make a bad movie. This movie sounds like he really had a take and something he wanted to make out of this film. Unfortunately, it didn't sway for him. I believe the common complaint this film gets is its editing. From the action scenes to even common dialogue scenes are intercut with shots that may last only a few seconds. This can be very jarring. In the past, we did talk about how
a few frames.
What did I say? 2 shots, 2 frames. Okay, let me say what I said. Okay, so from the action scenes to even common dialogue scenes are intercut with frames that may last only a few seconds. This can be very jarring.
No.
In
with shots that may only last a few frames. But
I hate you.
Just go ahead. Just keep reading. Just keep reading.
Hate you.
Just keep reading.
But I said a few seconds, whatever.
A few seconds is a long time. In an action scene, that's a long time. A few frames is more accurate because it's like, shoom, 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 shoom.
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't know the lingo and you're saying like, oh, it's like literally a second or whatever, then that's it's fairly short. You know what I mean?
Just keep going.
Okay, so this can be very jarring. In the past, we did talk about how the Bourne franchise had indirectly changed the outlook of the franchise. The Bourne franchise, starting with Bourne Identity, came out in 2002, the same year as Die Another Day. That film is very straightforward in its edits, nothing too crazy. The second film, directed by Paul Greengrass, Bourne Supremacy, came out in 2004, 2 years before Casino, has a lot of jarring edits and lots of shaky handheld camera that had become almost commonplace in the mid to early 2000s when we watched a lot of these types of action films. We've said this before, but every Bond film tends to lean into the current trends. But if you want your movie to do it right, might as well hire the people who started the trend in the first place. The editor on Quantum is in fact the same editor on Bourne Supremacy, Richard Pearson, who has also been credited for other films such as Iron Man 2, Kong Skull Island, Justice League, The Whedon Cut. Do you see a pattern here emerging with your editor and those movies?
Yeah.
It makes you think. It makes you wonder. Let's talk about some familiar faces real quick. So of course, we talked Craig returns, Jeffrey Wright returns as Felix Leiter. Our main Bond girl is Olga Kurylenko, plays Camille Montez. Yeah, is that right? Camille Montez? Camille? She is actually from Ukraine and had to get a DVD box set to watch the rest of the films because I guess in Ukraine they didn't have them readily available.
Because the movies glorify the West.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're hard to get a hold of.
They were. I mean, she had to get a DVD box set to actually watch all the other films. So she was probably a little more cognizant of what everything, all the Bond tropes and all that stuff, right? She was picked out of 400 other women, mainly due to not being nervous in the audition.
It's all about confidence.
She also had to get an accent coach to do the Latin American accent. Because she is from the Ukraine, so she'd have a different accent. I never knew that going into this movie. I thought she was from Latin America. She is not.
They do make a point of saying she's half Russian.
Did you know Ernesto Montes?
You have a beautiful Russian wife.
Well, his daughter works for me. Or did.
She's lovely.
Dude, shout out to Ukraine. Cool. If anybody who watches this is from Ukraine, can you invite me over? All y'all got some good-looking females in the Ukraine. You got a war going on right now. Send them my way.
So anyway, Matthew Almeric. Is that how you say his name? Matthew?
Is that the guy who
Matthew?
plays?
It looks like a weird
Green?
spelling of Matthew.
Matthew Almeric plays Dominic Green. He's French, by the way. Forster chose Almeric for his pitiful quality. He just kind of has a look that he could be kind of pitiful. Almeric wanted to wear makeup like every Bond villain before him to look grotesque, but Forster went all Chucky Rants and wasn't having any of that shit. He's like, no, we're not doing that.
Are his teeth being yellow natural?
I think that Forster was like, I don't want it to be the same as every other Bond villain. I don't want him to have the scar like in Casino. I want this guy to.
He comes across as really sleazy. He does a great job of that.
The yellow teeth, I think, is a fantastic call because the guy's whole thing is, like you said, he comes across as meek and like his whole thing is I care so much about the planet until he smiles, and then there's just something off about him. These days, everybody wants to complain like it's ableist or whatever, but this is a visual medium. And it being a visual medium, that's why sometimes bad guys have certain visual qualities that indicate bad guy. I understand people wanting to get rid of them or a specific director being like, no, I don't want to do that this time because that's a choice. But this choice of the yellow teeth and those black, devilish eyes, perfect. Green is a classic satanic figure, someone who gives off the appearance of meekness and even benevolence, but this is a deception. Just like his organization, Green Planet, it gives off the bright and shiny hope of a better tomorrow, but really it exists only to benefit itself.
I give you Icarus!
Green pulls this trick just like the devil himself would, by appealing to the ego and vanity of all the beautiful people at his party.
The Terra Project is just one small part of a global network of eco-parks that Green Planet has created to rejuvenate the world on the verge of collapse. I hope that tonight you make the decision to be part of that.
Ever been to Pleasure Island? Me neither. But they say it's a swell joint. No school, no cops. You can tear the joint apart. And nobody says a word. Plenty to eat, plenty to drink, and it's all free.
Right here, boys, right here. Get your cake, pie, little pickles, and ice cream. Eat all you can. Be a glutton. Stuff yourselves. It's all free, boys. It's all free.
You'd think something was gonna happen to us.
I couldn't agree more. I hope this figure is to your liking.
They give him their money, and in return, he gives them a feeling of self-satisfaction that isn't real at all.
What's he think I look like? A jackass?
You sure do.
You boys have had your fun. Now pay for it.
And then meanwhile, he does the same thing with Medrano. He gives with one hand and takes with the other.
We've already begun destabilizing the government. We'll supply the private security. We'll pay off the right officials. And we have 26 countries ready to officially recognize your new Bolivian government. You want your country back. My organization can give it to you within the week.
And in return, you want what?
A desert, this part.
This land is worthless.
So you're getting a great deal.
You won't find oil there. Everyone has tried.
Maybe, maybe not. But we own whatever we find.
As we said, he technically does have a weird physical deformity just like other Bond baddies, but by virtue of being easily hidden, he is that devil in plain sight, like hiding his horns under a hat, all the way up until he faces Bond physically and that act of meekness goes away and he reveals just how maniacal he really is.
Forster wanted him to just have a plain look to him. He didn't want him to look like a villain because basically the same reasons as you're saying. I didn't read anything about the yellow teeth, but it was mainly just because I want somebody who can basically, you see him out in public, there's nothing bad going on over here, like everything's all good. But obviously we know
we're saving the planet.
The
and then everybody cheers and he smiles, and you're like, whoa.
Wait a minute, huh?
Wait a second. This guy wants to save the world, but he can't even look after his own teeth?
It's the eco-friendly toothpaste. That's what it is. Next up, we got Gemma Arterton. I think I said that right. Arterton plays Chucky Rants' Fever Dream Strawberry Fields, which is weird tie-in to not only the Beatles, but how every Bond girl is a sexual innuendo.
Oh, providing the collars and cuffs match.
Yeah, sorry, Chucky. She isn't a natural redhead.
I tend to notice little things like that.
But she is gorgeous.
I don't
she
mind.
Is gorgeous.
I take them as they come.
Why don't you just dye the parts that show?
I do think this is weird, right? Like, think about it this way. When we talked about Goldfinger, in that movie, they make a reference to the Beatles, and Connery says something about like listening to being without earmuffs.
That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
And now we're full circle. We come to this scene where she's playing a character that's sort of named after a Beatles song.
Mr. Bond, my name is Fields.
She's not sort of named after a Beatles song. That is
straight
a
up named after
Beatles song.
And she gets covered in oil, not gold, like in Goldfinger. Yeah. Going off again, what Chuck was saying earlier was this is basically, again, Forster making a choice and saying this is showing how the current expensive currency today is not gold, but it is oil, and that's why she is covered in oil.
Black gold. But they never say strawberry in this movie.
It might be useful to know your real name.
Fields. Just Fields.
So,
No.
Did they
Miss
just
Fields.
cut that out?
I don't know.
Obviously,
but
the joke is that she's embarrassed to say her name is Strawberry. But is that in the credits? Where is it that suddenly she's Strawberry Fields?
I don't think it ever comes up. It's on the IMDb, but they only ever call her Miss Fields, and then she's got reddish
Like if it's in
hair,
the credits, I'm like, okay, but she, that's the joke. Just Fields.
It's in the credits, Strawberry Fields.
And I get why they would cut that, but what is the moment where it's revealed where she, what would that have been without it causing a laugh? Can you imagine if M would have been like, why her Bond?
Why her Bond?
Her name was Strawberry. Just poor Strawberry, and Bond's sitting there and he's like, it would cause an inappropriate laugh no matter where it was unveiled.
Yeah.
So I get why they cut it, but it's weird. It's like a unfired Chekhov's gun situation.
Feels it is.
The movie has several of these little moments where you think, why didn't they just cut that out? Why didn't they just delete Strawberry from the credits? And then the obvious interpretation would be that she's trying to keep things professional by not giving Bond her first name. It's pretty clear that Marc Forster didn't think that a ginger pubic hair joke would be appropriate for his art film, but then why leave it in the credits?
Doesn't he say something like strawberries? He says something like,
Lovely girl. Tastes like strawberries.
He doesn't say anything like
I
strawberries.
never say the
Why
word
am I
strawberry.
thinking he
Never
says
comes
that?
up.
Like strawberries.
No, it never comes up. Okay.
Yeah.
Never comes up.
As far as Bond references go, I wasn't really keeping my ear to the ground looking for him, but there is one that definitely sticks out to me, and that is the moment where he's got that bodyguard on the edge of the building. He's questioning him. The guy grabs him. That's straight out of The Spy Who Loved Me, where he...
Where's Peckish? Pyramids!
Pyramids! And then he knocks him off. He literally slaps him. He slaps his hand, and he falls off the building.
Yeah.
And then a few minutes later, he says he's going to Cairo.
You're going to get a phone call in a minute. Would you mind telling them I'm headed for Cairo?
Like, that's definitely a reference. Like,
Yeah.
it'd be one thing just knocking the guy off the building, but also referencing Cairo, because that's where that action took place in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Egyptian builders.
And then something a little more vague is the climactic battle with a fire axe from A View to a Kill. But otherwise, there's nothing as blatant as the oil girl, right?
No. David Harbour plays Greg Beam. It's just cool to see him in a role pre-Stranger Things where nobody really knows who he is at the time.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about it. It's just like, there's David Harbour. Kind of like when we saw Gerard Butler in Tomorrow Never Dies.
There's one other just like that. You're always pointing out Game of Thrones. You can't help
Oh,
yourself.
no.
Even though Game of Thrones sucks. Even though
Okay.
Game of Thrones sucks. You
Chucky.
always point them out, so we might as well do it.
All right, hold on.
Do
I
it.
didn't get her name.
Famously, she's Charlie Chaplin's granddaughter.
Ona Chaplin
She actually is the name.
gets a beer. She gets a beer
And
for
then
the
gets
general.
R-A-P-E-D.
She gets more than a beer.
Bad stuff happens to her, and then I swear you see a crotch shot of her.
They give her an upskirt to put on the snooty hat. And Marc Forster, he definitely has a snooty hat, but he deserves a snooty hat. It's like, suddenly we're the voyeur, we're violating her with our vision after the general violated her with his, you-know-what. But, it seems unnecessary in that moment. It's like, whoa, hey,
Yeah.
cut away. Hey, editor.
You're like, whoa,
I thought
hey.
you cut every shot down to a few frames, but you can't trim that one? Come on.
Yeah. Cameos, real quick. Alfonso Cuarón. He's best known for Children of Men and Gravity. He has a small cameo in this film because he's friends with Forster, and he is a Bolivian helicopter pilot. Also, Del Toro, Guillermo del Toro, he has some voices in the movie. That was, I don't know what voices he has, but sometimes in the backdrop you hear character voices, and apparently he's in the movie. And of course, we cannot forget our good friend of the channel. He's not a friend of the channel. Mikey G Wiz. Mikey G Wiz.
Where's he at?
He's in the movie. He's reading a newspaper. I don't know where it was at.
It's after the fight scene. Bond comes down and he's like, hey, any messages? And she gives him the briefcase. Mikey G Wiz is just chilling there
He's just
reading the
sitting there.
newspaper. You'd think he would have grown that Montego back out again.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, where are we going? Haiti? I got to get my Latino look going.
Fun
like
stuff.
the last few movies he'd have speaking roles. And in this one, he's like, just going to sit here and catch up on this paper. Yeah.
This one's more personal for me, but I think it's kind of cool. Neil Jackson plays Edmund Slate, who's a minor character. He's just basically like a jumping off point for Bond to kind of lead into his investigation.
It's a solid fight scene, though.
It's a solid fight scene. Oh, you know what? that is a reference to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Very similar to a fight scene that was in On Her Majesty's
Like the
Secret Service in the hotel
room
yeah.
fight? Yeah,
it's very
that makes
similar.
sense.
Fun fact about me, I work in television shows in Atlanta, and I got to actually work with him on a TV show, which was really cool. And I did talk to him very briefly about it, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't like say, hey, let's do a quick interview or something. It was really funny though when I asked him about the movie, and he's like, people don't like that one that much, do they? I was like, well, maybe, I don't know. Well, we haven't gotten
This
to there
guy
yet,
does.
So.
Anyway,
Yeah.
dude, if
But
you
that's
could
kinda cool.
just call him up or message him.
I don't
email
have his
him.
phone number. Let me see what I can do. Let me see
Yeah.
what I can do there.
Hi, I'm Neil Jackson, and I played Mr. Slate in Quantum of Solace.
Can I like woo? We don't have a crowd, but I feel like there needs to be a cheer after that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lackluster kind of like slow clap.
Like just yeah.
Yeah.
So Neil, let me just jump into it real quick. How did you get involved with Quantum of Solace?
Quantum of Solace was it was an audition. I was living in Los Angeles, but I was back shooting a film in London, and my agent sent me along to an audition. Nina Gold is the casting director who's done all of the Bonds, or at least all the recent Bonds. And I just landed in Hong Kong to start shooting the film. And as I was driving to the airport, got the call from my agent to say that I'd got Bond and that it was going to be 2 weeks in Panama.
Did you work closely at all with Marc Forster, or is it a second unit deal?
It was all second unit deal. I barely worked with Marc. I met Marc. We chatted a little bit about the character, but there was originally a lot more to the character that ended up on the screen, but they cut all of that before we went into the shooting. A lot of that was to do with pacing of the film. They realized spending a lot of time on this ancillary character when all they really needed was Bond to beat him up and kill him and assume his identity to move the story forward. We don't need to spend a lot of time waxing lyrical about him. So it would have probably just ended up on the editing floor anyway, even if they'd have shot it. 2 days to film that fight sequence. So we rehearsed it for 2 weeks, and then it was 2 days to film the whole fight sequence. And Marc Forster was there in Video Village and there with one of the Broccolis, and they were overseeing. It was very much the stunt team that were dictating where the camera was, where the camera moves would be, where the cut points would be. That's where you're talking about that collaboration angle, right? Of just, some people think that the director does everything, and some directors do everything. But when you've got something that is crossing genres and moving into areas that might be out of somebody's expertise, to brilliantly hand it over to somebody that's what they do 100% of the time is make fight stuff look amazing. And the only regret they ended up having is that we both ended up picking the fight up so quickly that they wished they'd made it twice as long.
Okay, because I was going to ask, it is so succinct. It's such a perfectly succinct fight, and which is more realistic than like 5 minutes of punching each other, like in something like From Russia with Love or something. Beautiful fight in that train, but it's so elongated, whereas this is just like two. Yeah. I think it's 45 seconds. Yeah, so it was never planned to be longer. That is the fight as it was planned and then shot.
The fight as it was planned and the fight as it was shot. So if they'd made it longer, yes, it would have been a more glorified fight sequence, but the realism of it I really loved, and it's one of the things that I think those guys do amazingly. Gary Powell and everybody in the stunt team, what they did with Bond, he uses anything at his disposal. I mean, that's the beauty of the sort of Bourne franchise, right? Of just like anything that can come to hand. If you've got a water bottle, you can hit him with a water bottle. In our fight sequence, he's got a pair of nail scissors and a laptop computer, and there's a vase at the beginning where he's smashing me with a vase. So anything,
and a door,
yeah.
Slam through the door,
anything that comes to hand. And so it made it very realistic and brutal. Aside from smashing through the door and smashing through the door at the end, which Bobby the stunt double did, who's fantastic, it was me and Daniel in there.
I think it defines the phrase half short, twice strong.
Right.
You know, within the series, it's absolutely a list topper of the most brutal. Would you watch it with us real quick? Maybe, yeah. I know it's so fast, but like I can slow it down, speed it up for you. But let me kick us over here.
Yeah, and if anything comes to mind as you're watching it, I'd love to hear it. You know.
Yeah, when's the last time you watched it?
I remember from this bit, I haven't watched this in a while. I remember from this bit, just that sort of excited, nervous anticipation, because I'm there waiting behind the wall. Right at the beginning, once we've smashed, so kind of like this bit that you've got here, what happened immediately after we've smashed through the doors, he puts his hand into a shoe and he uses that to knock me away. And then he punches me in the throat with the shoe. So I throw a kick at the same point as he hits me in the head and knocks me down. The fleshy part of your arm, here or here, is where when you're doing stump fighting, you want to block with. Because I don't want to block with the bone, which would be the bit that you'd normally hit with, because that's the bit that bruises. So if I strike here, that's going to bruise your forearm as I block. So you kind of get taught through doing fight stuff that you help your partner out and you hit with the fleshy part. But in the heat of the moment, Daniel wasn't doing that, and he wasn't pulling this shoe at all. And I remember us sat, because it was 2 days filming, we were sat after the first day of filming, and I had a red mark here, and my throat was hoarse, I had a red mark on the side of my head where he's hit me with the shoe, because he's just gone bam and hit me around. And each time it was...
So it really hurt. This whole fight really hurt.
You try to make it as safe as possible. And when we start rehearsing, you always do incredibly slow rehearsal periods. So you're just going through the beats very slowly and trying to make sure that it's a dance, right? It's a choreographed dance, but we're trying to make it look as real and as vicious as possible. And then you gradually build up, but you never want to go performance way. You never want to go more than 80%. 80% is fast enough. But when you call action, invariably 80% comes 110%. And so a lot of what happens in fight sequences on set is, that was great, let's slow it down a little bit, because it ends up rapid. And within
you can't see, you're not seeing all the nuance.
Yeah, you want to see the nuances of the hits and make sure that it's the audience are aware of the story that's being told within there. The subtle things of the shoe and the nail clippers, and the fact that he's lacerating all of these arteries with surgical precision. To leave me to bleed out at the end.
This death is just so brutal. No words at all in the scene. It's just being emptied of blood and just this look of horror almost. But how is it? How is it to be cradled by Daniel Craig while life is exiting your body?
I would have liked that he didn't pout so much as I died.
Go to that. Yeah, go to that.
That's great. It's just such a great death.
He was so good in it. I mean, it's just like he just has this energy about him. I mean, I remember the first time I met him, I just arrived in Panama and I just dropped my stuff off in the hotel and was just going to go for a walk around the grounds. And suddenly this force barreled in with 2 security guards into the hotel. And it was Daniel, and he walked past me and he went, "You're playing Slate?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, welcome to production." Shook my hand and then was straight into the thing. You're like, oh. This guy isn't messing around. His energy is so up and on. And he would finish 12 days of shooting where he's in every single scene and long days, and then come back, and he was still then doing half an hour to an hour of stunt rehearsal with me. And then he was going to the gym and doing his training. And he's doing that for 6 months. And so I don't know how many fight sequences he had in Quantum of Solace, a lot though. So it was literally a checkboard of, as they're preparing him to do hour one, they're working on the choreography, the one that he's going to do in 2 weeks' time. Once we put hour one to bed, he'll start learning the choreography for that one. And it's just a constant Rolodex of work for him. And the fact that he did it with the energy that he had and the grace that he had was really impressive to watch.
Well, speaking of Daniel, was there, you guys, obviously he assumes your identity. How much of a coincidence is it that you guys look similar? Was that ever discussed? Because obviously you were cast because you can fight and you could do the physical stuff, but was that ever brought up like, oh, you actually kind of look like him too?
That's a really good question. And I wonder if that was something that was added in afterwards, because the 16 guys that came to the stunt audition that we had at Pinewood, all different shapes and sizes and appearances. So it clearly wasn't something that they were thinking about straight off the bat, because if they were, it would have been whittled right down to only people that look like Daniel. Because we were filming this in 2007 during the writer's strikes. So they weren't allowed to change anything with the scripts or do anything because the writer's strikes were going on. So they were very locked into what they had. They can cut things out, but they couldn't change, manipulate, add anything in. So I wonder if after they cast me or whatever, they said, oh, that's a convenient plot point that we can throw in there, that because he ends up getting the case that's meant for me that leads to the next little part.
I mean, you guys look like you go to, look at this. You look like you go to the same barber, like look at the hair here to when it cuts, like you guys, there's just like a similarity.
Yeah, no, there's a real similarity to us.
As far as the writer's strike goes, how much did you guys feel that while you guys were shooting the movie, was it weird that you were like, we need to change this or that? Like
was it omnipresent on set?
Yeah.
Was it like discussed a lot and it was like this cloud of writer's strike over it? Or
no, not for me and for what I was doing. I never got to see a full script. And I was told afterwards that the scenes that were originally in from Edmund Kemp to set up his backstory were cut out. So I never even got to see those scenes.
Okay. So you just did the stunt stuff.
I was there for the fight, and the fight sequence is a vicious fight sequence in shoes. So it's up to interpretation, right? So
yeah, it's one eighth of the page, right? On the call sheet.
It'll take. It's just we'll do it in the morning.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it so much because the thing that I was in wasn't in any way affected by the writer's strike, because it was up to the creativity of the stunt team and the choreography that they wanted to put together.
Which is kind of representative of the movie at large. The movie really is very action heavy because it's like, well, we can't change this scene or change this. So, but we can do an action scene, right? So,
and also the concept. I mean, the concept, and I really admire them for the concept. The concept is it's an immediate follow-on from Casino Royale. It picks up almost immediately afterwards. They've never done that before, where they've done an actual sequel, because all the other Bond movies could be kind of watched out of sequence, and there's not really a through line that's continuing everything on. This was a direct, was straight into the almost credits roll and pick things straight back up again. Which I really admired, and especially with him having, for the first time, really been in love and then lost that love with Vesper. It's the driving force to go into this one. So he's just a man on a mission. He's a wrecking ball in this one. He's just trying to get answers, which leads to a ton of stunts and a lot of action, a lot of driving.
Can you rank Quantum of Solace?
Do you have a list in your head of like, oh, this is the best one, this is the worst one?
I got to say, and I feel like a dick for saying it, Quantum doesn't make the top 5. It probably doesn't even make the top 8 for me.
Okay,
it's around the middle.
It's in the middle for you.
It's top 10, but the lower echelon of top 10. I would say.
So the first thing I'd like to talk about is
shut up. No, stop. You stop. Hold on, Nanz. What did you think of this movie?
You want to hear what I think, McCurdy?
I want to know the truth.
Well, so the Pierce era I watched as a kid.
Got it.
And rewatching them for this, I didn't remember all of them per se. Craig era, I've seen them all in my later years, so they're all pretty fresh in my mind. Casino, I've always really liked, and that's probably the one I've seen the most. And then this is one of the Craig era films that did leave us, like, not the greatest taste in my mouth. But on rewatch for this show, it's good. Nothing sticks out to me as a big red flag. Or you mentioned the editing. As a layman, I suppose I don't notice that sort of thing, I guess.
Interesting.
Did it register with you?
No.
Okay.
Did not register in my mind.
Were you awake when you watched the movie?
I was. I watched it twice.
Looking at the evidence. And I know you're like, I like this movie. This movie's underrated. I think really what it comes down to when I think about this movie, you're right. It's not like Nan's reaction. You watch it, it's not the worst movie. I've seen the worst movie. We've talked about the other movies. The other movies, there are ones that are worse than this movie. This movie's not bad, but it is forgettable. There's other movies, I think, in the franchise that are way more memorable. And I think that I think sometimes if we get too deep in the snooty things, because again, like Marc Forster is making a lot of choices in this movie because he's like, well, I want to have fire, earth, and water. I want to have the bad guy not be grotesque. I want to have this. Like we know that he's doing all these things, but I feel like you get too deep in it, and then you kind of forget. Like, wait, why am I here? Oh, that's right. I'm here to promote a film that, guys want to be this dude, girls want to sleep with this guy. And if I'm at the end of this movie and I see it and I don't feel that way, I feel like you failed. And actually watching this now, it reminds me a lot more of License to Kill. And in License to Kill, we talked about how that movie is a good 80s action movie. It's a really good 80s action movie. It's not a really good Bond movie. And I feel like this is a really good Bourne early 2000s clone. It's not bad, but when I'm looking at all of the Bond films and overall, I just feel like I forget this one. I'm just like, oh yeah, that movie.
That makes sense.
You saying that it's forgettable, valid, right? Me, I like this movie because I think it's a really intelligent movie. Tomorrow Never Dies was a big dumb action movie, whereas this is a big smart movie that's bogged down by too much action.
I think it gets too plotty too.
That stuff I like though. That
I know you like it.
I'm the story guy.
I know you like it. I know. Okay, like I know. That's the other thing is, let me read this quote real quick, because I think like this kind of speaks very much to what we're talking about in this movie and like his Forster's thinking. Because Bond plays it real, I thought the political circumstance should be real too. Even though Bond shouldn't be a political film, I thought the more political I make it, the more real it feels. not just with Bolivia and what's happening in I want to say Tahiti. It's not Tahiti. Haiti. Is it Haiti? Haiti. Sorry, thank you. Let me redo that. I don't know why my brain's not working today.
Haiti.
All right, hold on. All right, Charlie, back up. George Bush is in the house.
Dude, George Bush never left.
Because Bond plays it real. I thought the political circumstance should be real too. Even though Bond shouldn't be a political film, I thought the more political I make it, the more real it feels. Not just with Bolivia, but with Haiti. But with all these corporations like Shell and Chevron saying they're green because it's so fashionable to be green, during the Cold War, everything was very clear. The good guys and the bad guys. Today, there's much overlapping of the good and the bad. It isn't as moral distinct because we all have both elements in us. Okay, I get it.
That's why this is a smart movie. That's why this is a good movie. For everything he just said. I've never heard that quote, but I pick up on all of that watching it.
But I don't give two shits. And it's the same reason.
You just want TNA.
I want a movie where I'm like, I know what's... Okay, here's the thing. It's not just the action. Listen, Chucky Rants, you can go on and all day about how this is such a smart movie and like, there's like, it has deep meaning and it's talking about today. You can say all of that. But if the movie's not giving me a reason to give a shit, then why should I give a shit? And I feel like the movie doesn't do a good job of doing that. And when I say that, it's the same reason why the first Timothy Dalton, Living Daylights. Living Daylights is a movie that, again, it's similar in that it's talking about what was currently going on at that point in time and trying to be real. And we're like, we're going to be real. We're going to talk about the Taliban. We're going to talk about this Russian invasion. We're going to talk about that stuff. And I'm like, it's great. It's happening in the headlines.
They really don't, though. Those things are there, but it's all confused, and there's...
I'll signal Amsterdam to ship the diamonds.
He arranged for the Russians to buy a large quantity of high-tech weapons. He's using the down payment to buy this opium instead.
Our obsessively in-depth analysis of the plot of that movie revealed that there really isn't anything going on. The Russian invasion of Afghanistan isn't the plot, it's just a setting for the third act. Otherwise, it's all a very pointlessly elaborate scheme to trick James Bond into killing one Russian general so that another general can buy some weapons. And then on top of that, it's not that the stakes are big or small, it's just that there are zero stakes whatsoever.
All I'm saying is the stakes of the overall movie, and you're gonna, I know what you're gonna say already. You're gonna say, yeah, Ryan, the stakes of this movie are not about the plotty things that are happening.
The Bolivians. It's not about the Bolivian
stuff. It's not the Bolivian stuff. It's about him and Vesper and all that. Great.
It's about Camille.
Tamia and her revenge and all that.
Bond and Camille trying to get revenge, and he learned something from her. But it's not about the Bolivians and their water, because we just see some Bolivians at some point, but it's like they don't get, just like the Taliban, they don't give us enough to care about. But it's more not the world-ending stakes, but the big dangerous stakes are that Spectre is going to have a lot more power.
This is the world's most precious resource. We need to control as much of it as we can. Bolivia must be top priority.
Sure.
A lot more power and influence. But the personal stakes are that Bond is dealing with losing Vesper and being on this murderous path.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Camille is on the same path, and she gets her revenge. And then at the end, she's like, it's all wrapped up in that scene together where she's like, now what do I do?
Better keep thinking. He's dead. Now what?
And he's like, well, now you can heal your country. And she's like, that's a good idea.
You have your quantum of solace.
Yeah.
It took all of this to get Bond to Russia. And then that's where he has that choice. Am I going to take my bloody revenge, or am I going to do right by M and my organization, and I'm going to put this Vesper stuff behind me? And like, again, throw the snooty hat on. When it comes to the cinematography of this movie, everything is a desert vista. All the colors are this desert vista. Black, brown, amber, cyan, all very much fall colors. Even down to that first photo of Vesper, it takes place in the fall. Every single shot follows this color layout. Whereas Casino was like spring and then summer.
For sure.
This movie then goes through this fall. You know, it's all following this like almost like a life cycle. Ends in winter, ends in the snow. That's all on purpose. That's all obviously done intentionally, especially with Mr. Forster, who is a smart guy. And it's all a very nice touch. It doesn't specifically make this movie better than the others, per se. Same goes for the whole Earth, Wind, and Fire thing with the action scenes. But these are just nice touches that lend to this overall theme of death and revenge.
If somebody tells me, oh, what do you remember out of most of these movies? Like if I'm like, oh, what do you remember out of Tomorrow Never Dies? I'm like, oh yeah, the motorcycle chase scene. That's badass. Or GoldenEye would be, there's a lot more stuff I would remember in GoldenEye or even Casino. But this movie, I'm like, the opera? I remember the opera.
Yeah.
I remember the car chase. If I had recently watched it, I'd be like, oh yeah, the exploding hotel. I would remember that. The opera scene, I liked the opera scene. Here's the one thing I wish the movie maybe it could have done. I feel like the movie does this. The writing is like, okay, they wanted to go in this direction. They knew that they were going to do the story with Vesper and everything and how he was going to feel after the fact, right? But it felt like the movie was like, okay, all right, but the story's going to go this way. Bond's going to investigate this thing that's all the way over here. And then we have to, by the end of the movie, we have to come back to this other. Because I will say, like, when you watch the end of the movie, you're like, oh, yeah, the necklace from Casino, like that. And she's wearing the necklace. Okay, I kind of remember that. But I feel like the movie's so, like, go left off. Yeah, for me, I was, like, watching this, like, oh, yeah, that's right. The necklace that she got. That's the same one that had Vesper.
I think we just have a better memory than you have. I think when you say it's not memorable, I think it's because your kids have killed your memory.
We see the necklace multiple times in this movie.
When? Yeah. When is the other time you see the necklace in the movie?
When he's drinking on the airplane.
Oh, yeah.
He's drinking Vesper martinis on the airplane.
Yeah, 6 of them.
He hides it from Mathis, but then Mathis is like, I've got pills that help you forget.
My point is that I wish maybe they made the villain the same person. Instead of having Dominic Green being this other character, and then we come back to the boyfriend.
Mr. White again?
No, make the boyfriend character that she had, make that guy the villain. Make that guy the one that he's chasing instead.
Sense.
Why wouldn't it make sense?
If Dominic Green had been the boyfriend?
Well, not Dominic Green. Make the guy, that character, the boyfriend character, and then you find out that there's more to that. Like, I would have been more on board and then been like, it's more focused to what's Bond's story.
You're saying that the guy who tricked Vesper would end up having been Dominic Green?
The main, or, I mean, maybe it's not Dominic Green. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a different character altogether. Because that was originally the intention when they were writing this. I just think it would have made it would have made the story a little more focused on this Bond thing instead of we're going off into, because it really does feel like the more we talk about it, it feels like Marc Forster really got excited about talking about real world politics and real world stuff. And it's like, that's great. But you do have to remember at the end of the day, we're making a franchise film for people to go sit and watch and have fun with. And we can still do that. But like at the end of the movie, if I don't give a shit, like I feel like I wasted my then $8 or whatever it was. That's my point.
If there's a moment where I just don't give a
I feel like here's where we're at. I feel like your point is like this movie's underrated. And I think you made your point pretty clear. Like when you really sit down and look at the movie and what it's trying to say, it is smart. I'm not disagreeing with you there.
I think it's also well executed.
There's things that like I think worked for some people, things that didn't work for some people. And I think we agreed on that too. I think when it comes down to the end of the movie, I just feel like it would have been nice to have just a little bit of what I think we would call maybe more of a comic book or black and white type ending. And I feel like we don't 100% get that because the movie wants to tell this Bolivian story. Something, there could have been more to it. And I just feel like I just don't give a shit by the end of the movie because I'm like, okay, what's at stake here? And it's more of this big real world stuff.
I think that's just a sign that Bond gets over Vesper, right? Not necessarily directly for himself, but he helps Camille do exactly the same thing, and that's enough for him to satisfy.
That's why I also bring up the Living Daylights, because I feel like the Living Daylights lives in that weird world of like, we're going to bring real world issues into the movie, so much so that I'm like, okay, great, but I want to just have something that like, if this doesn't happen, people are going to die, and we will literally see the implications of that.
This is where I pull out the personal thing, because Bond really is. That's why they have that moment at the bottom of that cave where that sinkhole.
Seems we're both using green to get to somebody.
Bond is trying to f up Quantum. That's the thing. That's like somebody out there going to be like, well, what are the stakes? Bond fails and Quantum makes money. And it's like, yeah, this cancer grows. This cancer that just so happened to also kill Vesper grows. So naturally, Bond defeating cutting off a tentacle is always good.
I think movies are
not low stakes.
I just think movies are typically better if it's a little more clear and we're talking about a very specific thing versus something that is not intellectual or not something that is like,
this is the end of For Your Eyes Only. This is exactly what we talked about at the end of For Your Eyes Only, where it's like the big stakes are the ATAC, but then the small stakes are that, what's her name, Greek?
But I'm half Greek. And Greek women, like Electra, always avenged their loved ones.
Electra chick gets her revenge. So you have these two things at once. You have Camille going in there and getting her revenge, and then you have Bond cutting off a tentacle, and I'm there with them. I want to see them go in. I want to see her kill this rapist. I want to see all these corrupt motherfuckers get their comeuppance. And Bond spares. I mean, he could have just dropped Green into the fire and he'd be like, ah! You know, just drop that demon into the hellfire. Instead, he lets him go so he can go save Camille. They have that great moment where obviously she's reliving. He's holding her like a child for a reason because she's reliving the very thing that literally and psychologically scarred her when she was a kid.
He shot my father. He did things to my mother and my sister. And I strangled them while I watched. I was too young to be any trouble. So he just smiled at me and set the house on fire. Go this way. Go this way. Like you said, take a deep breath. Make it count.
Close your eyes.
And it's very reminiscent of him supporting Vesper in the shower.
Yes.
But water
totally.
and fire instead.
Yes. Again, Marc Forster knows what he's doing.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
Once they get out of there, then he goes and...
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Then he goes and grabs up Green, and Green, Green spills his guts on Quantum, and then Bond gives him the perfect death. I said last episode, I'm like, fitting deaths aren't really a part of this anymore because it's more just action movie deaths, which is fine because we're living in this real world thing. Like his cohort just kind of blows up. It's, that's not like a fitting death or whatever. I don't even know what a fitting death for him would be otherwise, is my point. But no, Green gets the most perfect fitting death, especially as an echo of him having killed Strawberry Fields. He killed her with oil in her lungs.
Her lungs are full of it.
And now he's got oil in his stomach.
They found motor oil in his stomach.
He wanted to steal all this water, and then Bond leaves him in a desert with motor oil. Perfect. The same thing he promised everybody is what he got in the end, was that motor oil. Like, that is a perfect fitting death. This, I know you agree with, McCurdy, that Marc Forster is a smart dude. The guys who wrote this, especially Paul Haggis, really brought it. It's not the content for me. It's the form that it comes in sometimes, right? And whether it's the writer's strike or otherwise, there are these little blemishes, but me being the story guy and the bad guy, I fucking love the story as a cap on, again, a chaser to the expensive, amazing vodka, not necessarily the full martini shaken, not stirred, but the incredible vodka that was Casino. And this is that chaser that takes the burn away, literally and figuratively with Bond's acceptance. And it all builds up to that moment where he says,
I need you back.
I never left.
That's the whole point of that I never left. Now I'm ready to go. And then they follow that up with the first official turn and shoot, other than the Casino one, but not counting that as the same thing. Boom. Now Bond is Bond. We said last episode, this is Bond becoming Bond. Bond became Bond for 2 minutes, and then this whole thing kind of just solidifies it. And that's where it's like, I think it's like the perfect complementary piece. It's got some blemishes,
the one
but
guy
it's all
he
there.
really, really wanted to kill is the one he doesn't kill in the movie.
Yeah, and that says something.
Just shows maturity and growth of Bond to like, okay.
Yeah. Now M's like, now I know I can trust you.
Do it for the job. Do it for the mission.
So you want me to be half monk, half hitman?
Any thug can kill. I want you to take your ego out of the equation and to judge the situation dispassionately. I have to know I can trust you.
And you don't?
Well, it'd be a pretty cold bastard who didn't want revenge for the death of someone he loved. You had to kill him. Couldn't bring him in for questioning so that we might actually learn something. What happened to Slade?
I'm not dwelling on the past. I don't think you should either.
If you could avoid killing every possible lead, it would be deeply appreciated.
I'll do my best.
Is he still alive?
He is.
I'm surprised. Did you find what you were looking for?
Yes.
Good. I assume you have no regrets.
I don't. What about you?
Of course not. That would be unprofessional.
Let me put it this way. I'm looking at this list and I'm like, okay, where's Chucky going to put it, right? Where's Chucky Rants going to put it? For me, it's better than You Only Live Twice. It's better than Diamonds Are Forever. It's better than Moonraker. Is it better than Living Daylights? Charlie's like, well, the story's better. I'm like, okay.
Living Daylights.
Is it better than Octopussy? You're like, yeah, it's not that stupid muddled story. Okay, cool. Is it better than Dumb Action Movie? Yeah, I guess, because it's not dumb. It's the smart action movie. It doesn't have the same weird plot conveniences as Thunderball. For me, it's like Honor Majesty's Secret Service, where I'm personally, for me, I'm torn, because it's like, I like that movie. I think it's a little more clear. I think the action is cut better. There are scenes where I'm like, I enjoy that movie overall. I have a much better time watching that movie than I do this movie. But I feel like you would be like, no, it's better than that movie. And then I feel like we get in some weird territory where it's like, starts to feel like we're in the right realm for Your Eyes Only, A View to a Kill, and A World Is Not Enough. It's somewhere in those three movies for you, I think. Or you're going to be some bullshitter motherfucker being like, no, it's better than The Man with the Golden Gun.
Why don't you tell us where you are?
Hang on, Nanz, hang on. McCurdy, you just stripped my armor from me.
You stripped it from me.
Let me seriously, let me lay down the armor for a second.
I have no armor left.
Oh, okay.
I love you, dog. You just jumped into my heart and my soul and my mind. It's like you know me. Like everything you just, it's like
I
you
try
know
to guess
you
what
just
you think.
went through my thought process. It's like you know me better than I know me, dog. It's like
I'm yours.
you're always there for me to like yell at me when I like
Chucky,
Golden
shut
Gun
the
too
f-
much.
Hey,
and then you talk mad game about.
whoa,
I love
whoa.
you, dog. It's like I love you so much. I need you
up.
in my life. I need you. You know what I'm saying?
You know why you need to shut the f up, right? Because
Why?
you don't let anybody see you bleed.
Never let them see you bleed.
And you're bleeding right now, and I can't do that. Not on this podcast.
Always have an escape plan.
Wipe these tears away. You know what
All
I'm
right,
saying?
listen, shut the f up. I like Honor Majesty's Secret Service because I think
know
the
you
stakes
do.
are much clearer. I
You
think
like
the
that
action
one?
is much clearer.
Hipster.
I think it's a better movie. But because we're doing this bullshit list that's all fucked up anyway, it doesn't matter. When you look at the movies, it is a
We've only spent
list.
2 years on this.
It's 2 years of listening to somebody say better movie, better Shutters, and somebody complaining about other bullshit. And
What
then
would the
somebody
better? Hang on it. Pause. What would Scott's reaction be to this movie? Better fast editing. Better redheads. Like, what would he do?
It is better redheads. I will say that. I'll give you
Better
that.
opera.
But hold on, shut up.
Not a better song.
I do think
More water.
Here's
more
the thing.
water.
When I think about these movies, it does remind me of A View to a Kill and For Your Eyes Only, where the stakes are not like this. It's not this grand. I get the eye, like it's not as grandized, like very clear stakes. That is great with GoldenEye and some of the better movies, in my personal opinion, where it's like, okay, if this doesn't happen, the world's gonna fucking end. It's not that. It's more like this doesn't happen. You said the cancer's gonna spread, right? So that's where I'm like, yeah, View to a Kill or For Your Eyes Only is in that same realm. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, like that 10 or 11 spot is, I think, where Chucky's thinking, honestly.
What are you thinking?
What are you thinking?
Where are you?
I think that's where I'm at. The only one where I'm like, maybe it's above World Is Not Enough, but then I'm like, I don't know. World Is Not Enough at least. I don't know. There's something
That
about that
Electra
movie
stuff.
that I also don't like, though.
That movie is classic Bond and with a really compelling fresh bad guy.
Yes,
in the
and
form
it's a
of
villain
this,
that I'm
this
like,
woman,
okay,
you
it's a
know?
woman villain, and it's a little different, and it's at least it sticks out, and I remember it.
It's got fun, but and that's the thing. The eternal
There's some
question
fun
with this
things.
is always going to be that spectrum we talk about every time, which is the fun, goofy Bond.
Okay, now you're
and then
selling
the serious
this to me.
stuff.
Chucky, you're selling a number 10 to me now, because when you say it that way, I'm like, yeah, View to a Kill, I chastise the shit out of it for the fucking fire truck scene. But it does have Mayday. It does have Christopher Walken in one of his best performances of all time.
It's got fun Bond.
It's got fun Bond elements, and I do like that. I do like Bond.
That initial
fun
scene
Bond
is
thing.
him. He jumps in the iceberg sub and bangs a chick, and it's like this classic Bond. That's some classic Bond stuff.
And then For Your Eyes Only, it's like it's still. I think For Your Eyes Only is still pretty good, but like story wise, it's like the thing that I harped on a little bit about that movie was just the end of it, where it's like
Let's stay on, comrade.
Again, it's a real world politics movie where they're trying to throw more about like what's going on currently in the world, and that's where I'm like, yeah, I could see it living right next to those movies. That's kind of where I'm at. It's like, yes, sometimes we come into this like it's in the middle. Looking up the list, I'm like, maybe that's where it's at.
I want to bring up the whole trends thing because we bring up the trends in the same way that we just talk trivia, right? We brought up Bourne with Die Another Day because that was like, okay, movies are changing and people are liking these more serious movies now. We're in a post 9/11 world. That's just to put it in context. This whole trends thing, the constant arguments online just really start to bug me. It's like, just because you can point out where an idea came from, suddenly that means it's bad. And not only is it bad, but it also suddenly ceases to be a Bond movie somehow, instead of simply being a Bond movie coming in a different flavor. As opposed to just looking at the movie itself, be it like Bond bungee jumping, going to space, License to Kill being an 80s action movie. I don't care about the trends beyond they're fun to point out or to understand. But the question is the movie good or not, regardless? I just want to put this goddamn debate to bed because who gives a if they chase trends? I'm just getting really tired of the Bond movie, not a Bond movie thing because it's like, it implies that every movie has to be the same. But for me, the consistency is the character. The character has to carry over from one movie to the next. And you get that hardcore.
You're removed from duty and suspended pending further investigation.
The heavier character stuff is between Bond and M. You have classic elements of Bond having zero tolerance in the face of corruption and M giving him the trust that he deserves.
Find out where he's going. He's onto something.
Mom, the CIA is insisting.
Just about the CIA, all their trumped up evidence. He's my agent, and I trust him.
The lighter stuff is the womanizing and the boozing and the maxing out of his government expense account because he refuses to lay his life on the line and not be compensated with luxury.
We are teachers on sabbatical. This fits our cover.
Somos maestros on año sabático. Y nos ganamos la lotería.
And the classy elements are certainly there too. They even found a clever way to get Bond back in a tux via the opera scene.
I don't read what's online, but I will say if you are doing any kind of film analysis, it is a good thing to understand the context of where a trend comes from. Not
but
to
it's
say
not
that
necessary.
No, it is necessary. It's necessary to understand when the movie...
To enjoy it.
Well, that's...
For us, it lends to understanding. Yes, for
we are
us,
understanding
it's
the movie. We're
understand
trying to analyze the movie. We're trying to figure out why the filmmakers wanted to do the things they do. In this movie, it is very clear by even the fact the mention of who they had as one of the editors on this movie. It's very clear that they were like, we want to approach this movie like the Bourne films because and even I think even the story is very more in the line of trying to be a Bourne film.
My whole thing from the get-go has been, our directive is to pretend that future movies don't exist and that we're watching these movies in a vacuum. The history stuff is interesting, but the moment that you allow that to, like, oh, they're just trying to be the Bourne identity. My question is, what the is a Bourne identity? That's what my brain does because we're trying to watch these in a vacuum. And the fast editing and all that, the question isn't where did it come from? The question is, how is the movie regardless? So it's perfectly fine if they can make it blend. But here we are with the perfect example when it is kind of a bad thing because it changed how it was made instead of what they made. You know, kind of like movies that are shot in 3D and then they have a bunch of crap flying at the screen the whole time. So the whole, is this a Bond movie? It certainly has the Bond character, this new Craig one. So yes, it is a Bond movie, regardless of him not walking into a casino and saying, I'll have a martini shaken, not stirred. Like, no, every movie has to do that. I'm tired of this debate because people either say it doesn't have enough Bond elements, so it's not a Bond movie, or it has too many elements and now it's cookie cutter. Like, people keep complaining either way, and to the point where I'm like, f it. F the whole fucking stupid debate. It pisses me off. These Craig movies are real movies with emphasis on character, themes, and not just action and gadgets. That's the whole cup of tea argument. I like either direction. But saying one of them is a Bond movie and one of them isn't is to really misunderstand even just like the books. The last episode, we talked a whole lot about like GoldenEye bridges that gap between, you know, like book Bond and And movie, it's like the ultimate movie Bond, and then Casino is the ultimate book Bond, so far as adaptation goes. But at this point, though, the whole debate is stupid because we live in a different world now. The universe Sean Connery started is gone now. So fucking get over it. These movies aren't even based on books anymore. They're taking the character and tone from Casino and running with it in a very real world and mature manner. Everybody fucking loves it for the most part. Everybody fucking loves Casino, and then they complain that this movie does the same thing.
My argument to that is like, you're going to complain that people are complaining about something that I'm like, no, it's the same reason why, Charlie, if you go to a Western or if you go to a romantic comedy or if you go to a drama, there are certain aspects, there are certain things you're going to expect out of those movies.
Sure.
I think as you look at the movies that people tend to like more are the ones that lean into the tropes in a good way, but doesn't feel like it's overdoing it. And I think they're the ones that have the most balance. I think there's a real reason why most people don't like your favorite Man with the Golden Gun. Because when you watch that movie and you leave it, you do feel like, why did I not feel like this was the Bond movie? And then the next movie.
But why is that? That's the question. Why is that?
Yeah. And I think it really comes down to what is the DNA of these films. And I feel like when you too much with the DNA, I think people's general reaction is that's not what I was expecting. That's not what I wanted. But
that implies they all have to be the same. That's why
and
it drives me nuts.
They should, though. And if I'm going to go see a Bond movie,
but again,
I want a Bond movie. I don't want a Bourne Identity.
Say that's too much of the same.
I don't want to go see Bourne Legacy. I want to go see James Bond. And if I'm leaving the theater and I feel like I'm missing that,
Bond walks into a casino,
and I'm leaving the theater and I feel like I'm missing that.
Can you imagine being the Bond filmmakers and you're like, hey, we should change it up? Be like, no, resurrect Sean Connery, make him walk into a casino, say, my name's Bond, James Bond, and order a vodka martini shaken not
stirred.
You
don't like those moments? You're telling me you don't like those moments?
I like them, but you can't just replicate the same thing every time.
I love this, and like this feels like a Bond movie to me.
It's great.
Stale.
It's great.
I just think that
the moment they change it up, everybody freaks out. It's childish. It's just like you can't expect that. Like, you know what? How about we never make any more Bond movies? I just feel like you're having
an overly strong reaction because you found a movie that you really like because of what the message was saying, but then you were like, oh, but people hate this movie.
Does he really like it, or does he's just saying it's underrated?
I'm not talking about this movie right now. I'm talking about this annoying ass debate that goes on all the time, which is, oh, that's not a Bond movie. The character is pretty much always consistent.
Blofeld's something of a must with me.
That's why I'm so harsh on your favorite, Secret Service, because Bond repeatedly breaks character throughout, like quitting for no reason and endangering the mission with his penis.
Discipline 007. Discipline.
Fancy meeting you here, Fräulein.
If you go to the movies and there are a plethora of people and they go to the movie and they all kind of say the same thing and they're walking out and like they feel disappointed, there's probably a reason for that. And I think that was this movie. I think that people, if you want to say it this way, here's what you could say. I think this is what you could say. Yes, all your merits, what you said about the movie, like it's a smart movie. There's a lot of intelligence put in. There's a lot of thought put in by the director, by the writers of this film, regardless of there was a writer's strike or what, or the editing or whatever you want to say. Like there's a lot to that, right? But if I'm going in and I'm expecting certain things that I like about the Bond franchise, and I leave the theater and I feel like I didn't get those things, then I will feel disappointed.
I'm disappointed.
Now, I get what you're saying. It's like, that's not a Bond. Like, I'm not even saying it's not a Bond movie. Because the one thing I will...
It must always be the same. Always the same.
I'm not even saying that it will be the same, but I will say
I get it to a degree. Like if I go to a Fast and Furious movies, I need cars.
You need to have the elements, and I feel like this,
or like Pacific Rim, I think is so great because I just wanted robots fighting monsters, that's exactly what I got.
What is it about this that's missing? What is
it's the black and white? I think it's the
here's Golden Gun. What is Golden Gun missing that isn't Bond?
I feel like it doesn't have a sequence. Like here's the things that I really like about the stronger Bond movies, at least the ones that I think are on our list, save maybe for From Russia with Love, where we know if this doesn't happen, it's like we are very clearly understanding that bad things will happen if Bond doesn't save the day. I feel that way. I felt that way with Goldeneye. If Bond doesn't stop the GoldenEye weapon. Like, we know that bad things are going to happen for a lot of people, whether they're going to die, whether there's going to be a huge financial meltdown. Like, we understand, like, there is real world stakes. And we're talking about I mean, like, sometimes I throw around the word like comic book character, right? Like, that's when I feel like the Bond movie Bond works best, is when he kind of is a little bit of a comic book movie character, when we know that, like, if he doesn't save the day, people are going to die, and we know which people are going to die and why that would affect us personally. This movie, granted, is not that movie because it is trying to answer the things from the Casino era.
This movie is very much like the difference between Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. I bring it up this way all the time. The best good versus evil story ever told, Lord of the Rings, where it's just good people are good because they're good, bad people are bad because they're bad, or, evil people are evil because they're evil. And then Game of Thrones, where you have a spectrum of good and bad, but at the end of the day, everybody that's good and everybody that's bad, they're all just trying to protect their families. And that's what these guys are doing. The CIA guy, he kind of communicates in a scumly way, but at the end of the day, that guy is looking after us.
We've got a job to do. Let's go police the world.
I'm just saying, just putting out there, I think that that's why people just don't like this movie as much. But I do think you make really good arguments why maybe you should take a second look at it and say, it's a good movie.
What I'm expressing is Hollywood's problem from the beginning of time, which has been whenever a sequel comes about, people want it to be the same, but they don't want it to be too similar, right?
No,
and
but
so
that's
it's annoying. Like, that's that's my point. Thank you for emphasizing my point. My point is, when a sequel happens, people are like, well, Ghostbusters 2, it's too similar to the first one. I wanted something different, but also the same. That's the trouble. And here we are we're at 22 movies, and you necessarily have to change things up. And suddenly this flavor is to inject this real world stuff rather than another cookie cutter fucking bad guy with a scar on his face and an eye patch and a peg leg.
I missed the kill.
In my opinion, and this goes back to the opener where I said this movie is hated because it's the follow-up to something everyone loves.
The Americans are going to be none too pleased about this.
I promised them the sheaf, and they got the sheaf.
They got his body.
The expectations going into the sequel were high, and when such expectations aren't met, it hits exponentially harder. This is at the core of why I think it's underrated, because letdowns following great successes generally get punished more severely. Maybe had they gone straight into another exciting adventure, people would have appreciated this movie more, but instead they got this downer of a follow-up. Just look at the difference between the endings.
The name's Bond. James Bond. I never left.
Most people don't really like depressing movies, and I think that's the essential Bond element I keep trying to identify. Whether Bond is serious or goofy, the more successful films are fun. They're joyous. It's the difference between this and this. Bond isn't moping around drowning his sorrows, he's kicking ass and then getting ass.
For your eyes only, darling.
If you ask me, people are much less forgiving of this movie because they're frustrated that the follow-up to something so incredibly big and triumphant was this smaller and depressing film. And on that note, I can't help but equate these movies to The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, well known to be the best game ever made, this grand adventure that everybody loves, and then it's like, how do we follow that up? So Majora's Mask comes out later, and they had to rush it, right? They only had a year to make it, like the production problems they had on Quantum, and it's dark, and it's Link dealing with what happened in the first game. In Ocarina of Time, Link is a child who sets off to save the land of Hyrule from the forces of evil. However, before he's able to do so, his spirit gets trapped in purgatory for 7 years. So essentially, when he awakens, he's a child living in an adult's body. Link then sets out to save the world and get the girl. But at the end, after his maturity has grown to match this adult appearance, Zelda sends him back in time so that at the outset of Majora's Mask, he's essentially an adult who now lives in a child's body. Unable to simply exist as a normal child, Link sets out on a new path of adventure, eventually landing in a new realm called Termina, which means the end of something. It literally means death, and he quickly realizes that this place has only 3 days before it will be destroyed by a falling moon that will crash into a place called Clock Town, a very visual metaphor for the end of time. Who is looking to destroy time? A creature called a Skull Kid, the emphasis being on kid, a child of the forest that has been corrupted by an ancient evil mask that is facilitating a desire for an immortal childhood by allowing him to escape time. I don't want to grow up because I'm a forest kid. After all, time is frightening and relentless and cruel, time being the valuable resource that innocent children are yet unaware of, the thing that eventually forces them to grow up, and the very thing that haunts the minds of adults because we know ours to be finite, something Link is more than aware of despite his appearance. We see this everywhere in the game, as everybody Link comes across is haunted by their inevitable doom. Ocarina of Time is a pretty straightforward adventure story to save the world and get the girl, just like Casino Royale. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely tons of meaning in Ocarina of Time and Casino Royale alike, but instead of following up with the exact same thing, Majora's Mask is like an ancient poem about doom and gloom and the inevitability of death as seen through the eyes of a man trapped in what would otherwise be the innocent appearance of a child. Death clouds Link's mind and the lives of all the people of Termina, just like Bond reeling after the death of Vesper. Where Casino Royale was triumphant, Quantum of Solace is dark and depressing and oftentimes more meaningful. And I can't help but equate these two. The big hit, followed by the smaller but more dark, more meaningful tale that never outshines its predecessor, almost because it never could. So knowing that, they gave us something different. But it is that title. It's that small amount of comfort following that horrible thing that happened at the end of the big successful adventure. I've always equated these two, and there are some people who are like, I kind of like Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time. I'm sorry. It means more. And some people are like, I don't like it. It's dark and scary and weird. That's what I like about it, is that it's dark and scary and weird, and it's Bond dealing with the fallout. And on top of that, it has those real world issues that I don't think are difficult to follow. And I think that they're just more grown up. And this is another cup of tea argument. Do you like the guy who wants to blow up the world so the whole world will be water world and we all live under the sea because he's crazy? That's Lord of the Rings. Versus the more Game of Thrones style real world, because again, it's not good versus evil. It's good and bad versus evil. I went hardcore on this last episode where Bond isn't a good guy so much as he's a bad guy who works for good in order to defeat evil.
Now, you see, the world is full of temptations.
Temptations?
Yep, temptations. They're the wrong things that seem right at the time. But even though the right things may seem wrong sometimes, sometimes the wrong things may be right at the wrong time, or vice versa. Understand?
We need bad guys to do bad things to bad people for the sake of goodness, but Quantum is plain evil because it is self-serving and just power-hungry and leans on corruption to do its bidding.
You should know something about me and the people I work with. We deal with the left or the right, with dictators or liberators.
Not for the sake of everybody, but for the sake of itself.
The world's running out of oil, Em. The Russians aren't playing ball. The Americans and Chinese are dividing up what's left. Right or wrong doesn't come into it.
Regimes change once a week down here. And then I'm only no dirtier than the next guy.
Oh, you see, that's what I like about U.S. intelligence. You'll lie down with anybody.
Including you, brother. Including you.
As opposed to a government doing bad things for the sake of its people. Those are two different things. Or even like, I know either of you would kill for your families. I certainly would fucking kill for my family. Does that make me evil? If you think so, fuck you. You know, I'll kill you too. So as one gets older, the villains and the heroes get all mixed up, just like Mathis says.
But I guess when one's young, it seems very easy to distinguish between right and wrong. But as one gets older, it becomes more difficult. The villains and the heroes get all mixed up.
That's great. That's more grown up. That's how good versus evil becomes good versus sympathetic bad guy, right? So you have a million quotes here.
You know who Green is and you want to put us in bed with him. You aren't kidding, right?
Yeah, you're right. We should just deal with nice people.
Say Green is a villain. If we refuse to do business with villains, we'd have almost no one to trade with.
You can't tell your friends from your enemies. It's time to go.
The greatest speech ever given with this flavor is from Team America World Police. The dicks assholes speech. Pussies don't like dicks because pussies get by dicks.
But dicks also assholes.
Assholes that just want to shit on everything. Pussies may think they can deal with assholes their way, but the only thing that can an asshole is a dick.
With some balls. The problem with dicks is that sometimes they too much.
Or when it isn't appropriate. And it takes a pussy to show them that. But sometimes pussies can be so full of shit that they become assholes themselves.
Because pussies are only 1.5 inches away from assholes. I don't know much in this crazy, crazy world. But I do know that if you don't let us this asshole, we are gonna have our dicks and our pussies all covered in shit.
That may sound disgusting, but that is the most profound, that is like the most perfect speech ever made regarding good, bad, and evil. Because you need good and bad to work together to defeat evil. That's what Spectre is. That's what Quantum is evil. That is just corruption. As opposed to the Americans, they're being bad. The Brits, they're being bad. And then Bond is being bad. They're all looking out for themselves. And that's where it's so much more complex than just the good versus evil of the days of, not even Moonraker. Moonraker was in the same vein, but like Spy Who Loved Me, Tomorrow Never Dies, just this guy's bad because he's bad. So,
yeah.
That speech is, God damn it, that speech is so good. But
so good.
Easy, easy. Whoa, you gotta calm down there, Chuck. I hurt people. I'm a dick. Well, being a dick ain't so bad. See, there's 3 kinds of people. Dicks, pussies, and assholes. Pussies think everyone can get along, and dicks just want to f*** all the time without thinking it through. But then you got your assholes, Chuck. And all the assholes want is to all over everything. So pussies may get mad at dicks once in a while because pussies get by dicks. But dicks also assholes, Chuck. And if they didn't the assholes, you know what you'd get? You'd get your dick and your pussy all covered in
That's all reflected in that moment where Green is sitting down with the general and lays out that incredible threat.
If the current president had been more agreeable, I wouldn't be talking to you. So, if you decide not to sign, you will wake up with your balls in your mouth and your willing replacement standing over you. You doubt that, then shoot me, take that money, and have a good night's sleep.
This is how power works. This is precisely what corruption is. Those with power give those under them just a little power so long as they do their bidding. If they refuse, if that person decides to do the right thing, they are easily removed and replaced with someone willing to do whatever it takes to stay in favor of those who have power so they can have just a little for themselves. This is also reflected in the moment when the South American section chief says,
I need to know you're on the team, Felix. I need to know you value your career.
Notice he says career and not country. The emphasis, of course, being that both instances play to the individual's selfishness, right? This is also how celebrity culture works. Say the words we want you to say, believe the things we want you to believe, spread the beliefs we want you to spread, or we'll replace you with the other millions of people that want fame and fortune and are willing to do whatever it takes to get it. They'll do it.
I'm going to school.
School. Ah, yes. Then you haven't heard of the easy road to success. No? I'm speaking, my boy, of the theater. Fame.
Shame?
As actors, it is our responsibility to read the newspapers and then say what we read on television like it's our own opinion. Matt Damon.
So this is what people mean when they say they've sold their soul or made a deal with the devil, because the devil is that, you know, if you give a mouse a cookie monster, always an ulterior motive, always demanding more and more.
Oh, I get it. I'm supposed to get in your car and let you put your finger inside me. Then if I go down on you, I get a movie part.
No, I just want to show you something.
Yeah, I'll bet you do.
And the shameless give in because they naturally rationalize their selfish decision by the thought, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will. That's exactly what Medrano does here.
Sometimes pussies get so full of that they become assholes themselves.
Such people are cowards. This is why we love Bond, though, because he cannot be bought or bargained with. He's that classic Western force that comes across deeply rooted corruption and single-handedly cuts it out. It's what we all wish we could do in a world that just seems so corrupt. Everything seems so corrupt.
There's $2 million in that suitcase. I'll split it with you.
But I don't need £1 million.
Stupido. I did think of asking you to join my little scheme. I'm not for hire. You earned it. You keep it, old buddy.
But Spectre has so many tentacles that no matter how many he destroys, they always return. This, of course, reflects the eternal battle of good versus evil, the duality of man as well, and then the dicks fucking the asshole so the dicks and the pussies don't get covered in shit. That's why I like this movie, McCurdy. You just gotta put up with me. So
I'm annoyed. I'm just annoyed because it's a constant, like, I get it. Like, I'm literally sitting here, I'm like, I get it. I get your speech. I get why you're like,
but
this
you're
movie's,
saying it's not memorable.
it's not a memorable movie, and I feel like there are things they could have done to this movie to make it a little more commercial, would be the clearest word I could use. I think that is the
commercial.
To me, is the underlining problem of this movie is it just kind of like, it ends and you're like, okay. It ends and you're like, it's just for the smart people in the audience. It's for the Chucky Rants who want to, like, that was so meaningful. That talks about society. And I'm like, I get it. But we're talking about James Bond here, guys. Come on. This is,
but you
like,
still
what?
get
We're talking
Bond.
about.
This is what I mean.
We're talking about this franchise that is
This is
a
what
fun,
I mean, though.
fun franchise. It's a fun franchise of movies. And we want to see action happen. We want to see black and white. We want to see Westerns.
Granted, you can say, well, Char, I just don't give a shit as much. Valid. But for me, I'm like, this is a little breath of fresh air where we're away from Lord of the Rings, and all y'all know I fucking love Lord of the Rings. Classic good versus evil. But now we're in that Game of Thrones territory where it's not so simple. And not only is that the case, but that's just a heavy theme throughout.
I wouldn't have thought Vesper the sentimental type.
We never really know anyone, do we?
You never know who might be the bad guy. Vesper's boyfriend turned out to be Quantum, M's bodyguard was Quantum, all of these weird rich people are Quantum, and ultimately for Bond, the love of his life was turned by Quantum, so he's doubly hurt because not only did he lose her, but he's unsure whether or not she ever even loved him in the first place.
I'm not going to go chasing him. He's not important. And neither was she.
Remember, back in Casino, she never said I love you.
I wonder if that's why I love you.
You love me?
I think she loved you. Right up until the moment she betrayed me. She died for you.
So that's the stake, right? That Quantum is going to grow in power, the corruption is going to spread, but then also Bond's personal stake in getting the information from Green about the guy who betrayed Vesper.
Yeah. But that's why I think the movie might be a little muddy.
Camille.
But I think that might be why the movie's a little muddy, because it's like, now you're asking two different things. It's got to be this, and then it's got to be this, but it's also got to be this.
They handle
versus
the big,
it being one thing.
They handle the big stakes, and then the epilogue. That's literally an epilogue in Russia. That's the movie's already climaxed, and then the epilogue is the closure.
It should be one thing.
No, it doesn't have to be. Dude, you saying that Dominic Green
should have been one thing
Vesper's
if you wanted people to leave the theater and be like, I enjoyed
Vesper
that
Green's boyfriend is just a teeny tiny pawn in the grand scheme of Spectre, Quantum, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
He's at such a low level, it doesn't matter.
And you see that in his face. He's just like, the irony, of course, is that he is no different from Bond, who's made an entire career out of seducing women.
You infiltrated Green's organization by having sex with him.
That offends you?
No, not in the slightest.
He is just
I'm
a
just
pawn.
here trying to trying to turn this Canadian chick.
Perhaps we should shift our focus to the Canadian.
Superfly Canadian.
Yeah, she does a great job.
Do you think she was the runner-up for some of the other parts in the film?
Yeah, probably.
Do you think they were like, okay, well, we like these 3 women, but we're going to keep her as the main one, and then we like this girl, but we're going to give you a smaller role?
Here's my thing. As an editor, contrary to popular opinion, I like the editing for most of this movie. There are several moments, and maybe in the edit I'll point them out. It's hard to point them out.
Isn't it also the point of editing to not notice the editing?
Yeah,
too?
as I laid out in the last episode, I'm like, editing should be invisible, depending on what the scene is, because every single movie ever, the whole point of editing, and this is why I really don't like single take movies, editing is like music. There's a rhythm to it. There's a feel to it. If an edit feels good, you keep it. If it's jarring, you don't want that, unless you do want it to be jarring. And that's the point. It just like music, somebody might say, oh, that note was off or that tuning is bad. And sometimes it's like, yeah, that's the point. In that moment, you're supposed to feel this way, right? So editing is a tool. Now, it is frantic, but it's only frantic at frantic moments.
Yeah.
So you can make the case that it is all on purpose. That's the thing about movies. It's not like you edit it on the fly. There's not somebody in the back of the theater editing it real quick. You can perfect it, you can make it the way you want, and then you put it out into the world. So everything they do is motivated. The question then is, does that work? So the moments where it doesn't work for me specifically are, and again, this is where Forster shows that he's not a dumb dude. He very much on purpose has that first, not the opening action scene, but the first real action scene is that chase with Mitchell, where they're doing some parallel cutting between a horse race and Bond chasing this guy. Obvious parallel, right? But they do it so much to the point where you're like, I got it, right? And then even after they get away from the racetrack, they still cut back. Maybe one more time they cut back.
They cut back. It's almost like they have to cut back because he's shooting at the civilians. And like in any other Bond movie, we wouldn't give a shit. We're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
obviously that sucks. Like you'd see it real quick and you're like, okay, I got it. But then the movie wants us to, it's like the movie's trying to tell us like, no, we need to care about the civilians in the movie as well. So I'm like, it's just like, I don't need you to cut back to that. I don't need that.
I think we could have seen the lady get hit and then nothing else, but I think we do get maybe 1 or 2 other cuts of people like,
So it's been about 30 seconds since we saw that lady get shot. And so here we are chasing. And then we cut back to the crowd and we see the woman fall again. We've already seen her fall. So it's just in a movie that's trying to be really tight, it throws in some stuff like that, which is completely unnecessary. And then the second time that they do that fun parallel thing is obviously at the Tosca play, where what's happening in the play is kind of being mirrored in what's happening with Bond, who's having a shootout. So it's kind of, again, to put on that snooty hat, we have this clever cross-cutting between Bond and a parallel action, some climactic shooting in the Tosca opera that's symbolic of the many executing the one. I mean, again, this is a Spectre movie, right? Quantum is Spectre.
Yeah.
So all these guys killing this one guy, meanwhile Bond is having a shootout with 5, the same amount of guys, right? So it's smart. But then they keep cutting to another part of the play where this woman is stabbing this man. And again, to keep that snooty hat on, the only parallel you can draw is that Bond constantly has Vesper's betrayal on his mind. So you can be like, oh, there's meaning to that. But in the moment, it's so unnecessary. And it just pulls us away from Bond to where, that's what I mean. It's like they do some intelligent editing that's meaningful, but then they take it one step too far. It's elegant and
like,
beautiful,
I get it.
but it's like, it's
like trying to be artsy, but then it like goes too far and you're like, all right, I get it.
It's not sickening to me, but again, contrary to popular opinion, I like the editing for most of the movie, but recognize that there are several moments where they take it too far because it confuses what's happening. Sometimes maybe on purpose they do this to cover up a mistake, right? But it never becomes Liam Neeson jumping a fence. It never reaches that embarrassing point. Yeah.
It's not like I've never noticed bad editing before, but nothing in this movie sticks out that badly to me.
They also played with the editing in movies like Secret Service, right? They did a lot of jump cutting there for effect. Die Another Day, another example where they were really getting experimental with the editing, trying to pretend that they were like a Fast and Furious movie or whatever. But that's not what killed those movies, right? Specifically, that's not what killed those movies. It's more story stuff. My point being, editing for effect is not a new thing. And the editing may not be your cup of tea, but it doesn't kill this movie. It's like, you may not like it, but it does not kill this movie. And most of the time I like it. So let's go through each action scene. The 4 elements and then some, right?
There's a lot of action scenes, which I am good with.
A lot of action scenes. It's kind of similar to GoldenEye's successor did the same thing, right? 2 great movies, Casino and GoldenEye. Tomorrow Never Dies, they did it because I don't think they didn't really have too much of a story, so they fell back on action. This, they had a writer's strike, so they also fell back on action. So again, like Live and Let Die. What do we do? I don't know. Just start a chase scene, quick, to fill in 20 minutes. So the opener, I'm all about it. I'm all about that opener. I can follow the action. And again, as an editor, I like fast cutting. I don't like it to be cutty, but I like fast cutting for effect. And I also don't like wasting time. I mean, the number one thing I ever hear back on my editing is, yeah, it cut too fast. It was too cutty. And I'm always like, shut up. How did it feel? So I think that opener is great. I have no problems with the opener.
I disagree, but that's
Go ahead.
That's my thing with the opener is that as I'm watching, there are moments where I'm like, I'm okay with how choppy the edit is. I know that they're editing to give you a feeling of chaoticness, but at the same time, it being a Bond movie, I would appreciated a little bit more clarity as to what is at stake here. And I feel like it's a lot of just like, we're in the moment of craziness and this is all happening. And you're almost like, it's almost like you're a witness to something if you were just a bystander watching it rather than being in the moment with Bond. I don't completely hate it. Like there's moments where I'm like, okay, I'm okay with it. But then there are moments where I'm like, him getting hit with the truck that runs right back into him. And that happens so quick that I feel like it could have used you could breathe a little bit there. And then it's like, oh, he's almost dead. Oh no, he gets right out of it. It's not a big deal. And that's where the edit on some of that scene I think could have used a little bit more breathing room. And I do think part of it is they wanted to make that first scene really short because obviously he wanted this movie to be, bare bones, very quick, very fast. Yep. And I can see that's probably what his thought process was on that first scene.
I love that whole opening scene. For me, the quick cutting in that scene is representative of how fast Bond has to make decisions while driving at a high speed, and just exemplifies that he's a really good driver. And then we do get the reason he's trying to escape later on when he opens the trunk and we see Mr. White.
It's time to get out.
Sometimes I want to feel moments as much as I want things to be fast.
I think you're both right. I think Nanz is correct in everything he just said. I think that the mantra of the editing could be, well, there could be some breathing room, but that just becomes like this shot, that shot. Where I disagree with you, McCurdy, is that opening is not about stakes. It's not about caring about the who, what, where, and why. It's just getting us into kind of asking the question of what's happening, because there's that payoff. It's a half joke, half payoff of that trunk opening up, and it's like, holy shit, Mr. White was in there the whole time. Like, he must have a concussion at this point. And that's the payoff. Oh, that's what the stakes were. And I think that's rock solid coming after Casino. Just getting right into it, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know Mr. White's back there. We don't know why Bond is being chased. Oh, boom, off and running. So you can go ahead and nitpick, like, this shot should have been longer. This little moment should have been longer.
I'm not even saying the nitpicks of the specific shots, but for me, it's like it could have used
stakes.
Yeah, it could have used some stakes. It could have used some geography going into
my point is it didn't need stakes. My point is that it pays off.
Bond is trying to
what
get
is
away.
going
That's
on,
all you need to know.
Exactly. The what is going on is paid off. And then retroactively, oh, that's what the stakes were. As opposed to like, hold on, Mr. White, I'm gonna turn now.
No, I mean, obviously we're not gonna get that, but
they did that on purpose. That was intentionally done. We already talked about the problems with the horse race chase. Overall, it's fine, but just like the handcuff chase in Tomorrow Never Dies, I don't understand the motivation behind the chase. I don't really understand why it's happening. What I'm talking about is at the outset, right? Let me lay out the scene. So Mitchell.
Hello, Mitchell. Bond.
Who's M's bodyguard, is standing there with another bodyguard or guard, and then Bond. So you have 3 guards.
We're guards. We're guards. Oh, we're guards. We're guards.
3 men, Mr. White, and M, right? And Mr. White does the whole, we have people everywhere.
We have people everywhere. Am I right?
And then Mitchell shoots guy number 2, right? So now it's just Mitchell and Bond. I probably rewound it maybe a dozen times, and I'm like, what is happening? Mitchell shoots guy. M, like, collapses. It almost looks like M got shot, but she didn't get shot. It's like she faints in a way. She just falls.
He shoots at M and misses, but he hits, like, the pole that she's standing next to, which I'm thinking is a pole that's holding, like, a saline bag for Mr. White.
It's like a medical pole.
And she, like...
So, and she kind of like buckles a little bit. And then Bond throws a chair. Like, those are the times where it's almost like they're covering up for maybe they didn't get certain shots, so they just make it all frantic, so you don't know what the hell's going on. There are pockets where it's like, what the hell just happened? That was unclear, but then that goes away. My ultimate point, though, is that Bond and Mitchell have a little scuffle. Mitchell grabs a gun. And instead of turning around and pointing the gun at Bond and saying, you know, freeze, I'm going to kill you and then take Mr. White with me, Mitchell starts running away. Why does Mitchell start running away?
He just knows Bond is that awesome.
There was no reason.
The horse race. That's why the horse race is in there. He wanted to see the horses.
Wait, I put some money on this.
He's like, this whole interrogation scene has taken too long. I want to see.
No,
the
I'm not an agent of quantum. I just want to get out of here to go.
I just want to see the horse races.
But you know what I mean? It was like an unmotivated chase because I don't understand why Mitchell is running away instead of trying to kill Bond to then take Mr. White.
It's not like Bond has an upper hand in this space. Yeah. Well, unless he's trying to get away because he knows that like someone's gonna call somebody from, you know.
Well,
MI6.
when Bond comes back, Mr. White is gone. So it's like, okay, somebody was coming. But that doesn't really answer my question, which is Mitchell had the upper hand. Why did he suddenly run? I mean, M runs away because because M's like, well, I'm getting the out of here. But why did Mitchell run away?
Charlie, you didn't know this. His character's actually the brother of the woman in the beginning of World Is Not Enough who's in the boat.
I don't understand this.
Because the world is not enough. Yeah, and the world is not enough. The boat chase that doesn't need to happen, and you're like, why? Why?
This whole family exists to interrupt and unmotivate various chase scenes through Bond. So, okay, and that's what I mean. Like, I think the scaffold fight, I actually really love the scaffold fight.
It's cool.
Yeah, the scaffold
chase
fight's cool.
to get there.
They have all this really cool stuff and them like running through the sewers that they just kind of like breeze over with horse racing.
For me, it just shows how brutish James Bond is.
Yeah.
He just jumps off of roofs and hits walls and jumps onto a moving
no
bus.
doubt. And all that stuff is great. I love all that stuff. And I'm not going to nitpick too much cutting to the race because I see what they're trying to do. But I mean, for me, I don't care about that stuff so much as I care about that moment when Mitchell first starts shooting. And it's like, wait, the chair got thrown and what's happening? If I'm saying what is happening, that's not so good. If there's a moment where, I mean, because remember back in Casino,
sometimes
they remember when they flash when the Bent station chief gets shot and they do the flash frames of the family. Like somebody could be like, that was too quick. That was too no. That was for a purpose. That was almost to give you this subconscious feeling, right? People can really sometimes obnoxiously nitpick editing if they're looking for it. Like Nanz, you're not looking for it, so you're not thinking. I'm not talking about McCurdy. I'm talking about people in general. If they're looking for a problem, they will find it. But for me, it only becomes a problem if I'm asking, wait, what just happened? Then it is a problem. So anyway, because the scaffolding...
It's a lot easier to see what's happening in the scaffolding portion than it is in that right before the chase starts portion. Like you said, you had to watch it several times. Like, oh, did M get hit? No, okay.
Yeah. The scaffolding suddenly goes just as frantic, but it's great. And it has a fantastic ending. That is a fantastic ending to the scaffold fight. The next one is the hotel room fight, which I think is perfect, brutal, brief, and clear.
It's their answer to like, oh, we're like the Bourne franchise now. We're going to do a Bourne fight in this movie.
It almost seems like Bond doesn't try to not kill him, though. He just like goes and kills him.
And that was like,
shouldn't have killed him.
Yeah, it's a point of contention with him. It's like, you just let him die. You didn't question him.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that Bond is like, I'm going to go in there and kill this guy, and if this guy looks at me wrong, I'm going to kill him. It's more like Bond keeps killing because he has to, but he also don't give a f***. Like, he also is just like, this guy f***s with me for 1 second, I'm just going to put him down.
Yeah.
So it's kind of half and half.
He's pissed about Vesper.
Yeah, it's like he's pissed about Vesper, but he's also doing his job. And then there's M, who thinks that everything is motivated by Vesper, so M is constantly on his ass.
I need to know that I can trust you.
You don't have to worry about me.
She's constantly checking in with him, and he's like, no, I'm just trying to do my job. She's like, I don't know if I really believe you.
I need you to come in and debrief.
I don't have time.
Bond, you killed a man in Brigance.
I did my best not to.
You shot him at point blank and threw him off a roof. I'd hardly call that showing restraint.
So it's kind of complicated in that, where it's not always one way or the other.
You said you weren't motivated by revenge.
I'm motivated by my duty.
No. I think you're so blinded by inconsolable rage that you don't care who you hurt.
But at the end of the day, he's just like, you know what? F it. You're dead. He's like, I'm going to walk into this hotel room and talk to this guy. Oh, no, f you. You're dead. And I think that one's perfect. Now, the boat chase.
The boat chase is pretty bad, actually.
It's fine.
What's bad about it?
The main thing is that you don't really get a sense of geography. You don't get a sense of where they're at, who's chasing who. There's times when we just get shots of just water spraying up, but not really seeing like, wait, which boat was that? Was that the bad guy's boat? Was that Bond's boat? I think people generally want to have clear geography when they see an action scene. And if you don't have that, I think that's when people are going to start complaining. And I know you guys are like, both of you guys are like, no, it's fine. I thought it was fine, whatever. But I think most people would say if I can't clearly understand where A and B and C are, they're going to get a little lost and they may not like it.
I don't think the boat scene is a problem. I think you understand that they are in a harbor. So there's boats all over the place, and I don't think you need to know any more than that.
There's one shot, there's one particular cut in this chase that I was like, why would you do that? Why would you cut there? All it is Bond falls from the controls of the boat and then gets back up to get the controls. That's it. That's the shot, but it literally...
So it's kind of pointless.
They cut in the middle of that action to another take of him doing that. And I'm like, you could have just used the one cut. You don't need that extra cut in there. And it's like little things like that where I'm like, that really stuck out to me.
If they're looking for a problem, they will find it.
And it bothered me for some reason.
Typically because, I mean, the motivation between using one shot or two is because of the energy.
Sure.
They do those because there is a rhythm, there is an energy to cuts. That's why, for me, I like the editing in this movie. When I say that, I'm not talking about the times where it goes a little too far or is unclear. But in general, I like the energy that comes about from cutting because it, just like music, there's a rhythm to it. So it naturally picks up in action scenes unless there's a reason not to. And I mean, even like take any movie and the cuts are going to increase on an action scene.
I just think that scene's not very clear. Compare that boat scene to any of the previous boat scenes we've seen. I think they're much better ones that are way more clear and don't rely so heavily on trying to do quick cuts to give energy. You need to orientate yourself. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to get lost in what you're looking at.
The word is orientation. When an editor is editing, they know what's happening. They've seen all the raw footage. Their job is to then communicate that to an audience. And if the audience ever goes, what just happened and where am I? That's where you've messed up. You need to be orienting things for the audience. But for me, again, I'm always going to be like, yeah, sure. You could have used a shot here or there to kind of pad it out. But for me, it's more at the end of the scene, the frantic cutting is, again, used to cut up a moment of something not being clear. So the final boat drives up on top of them. She gets knocked out. Bond sees a hook and some rope. So he throws the hook over the top onto the other boat. And then with no context to what the other side of the rope is doing, they just get ripped away. He doesn't throw an anchor over the side. He doesn't throw an other end of the rope onto another boat or anything. Again, it's like, maybe if we cut it fast enough, nobody will notice that what we just did doesn't make sense. A good example of this being in the beginning of A View to a Kill, Bond hijacks that little snowmobile thing, and he does it by throwing a hook into a ravine, and then he goes and hooks that to the guy, and then it rips him off. Like, okay, I know how Bond did that. It made contextual sense. Whereas with this, I'm like, you just threw a hook in there. That's not going to do anything. It's like in Batman when he flips the truck. hook the truck, lampposts, hook it into the ground, truck flips. Okay, that made sense. But if he didn't do that, you'd be like, how did he flip the truck? You know, but that's what I mean. They cut it so quick to cover up that zit. So anyway, the next one is the opera scene. Again, we have clever cross-cutting between Bond and parallel action. It's intentional. The like smorgasbord of shots is intentional and it's meant to say something. I just remember the first time I ever saw it being like, wait, what's happening? You know, because you're expecting a traditional shootout, and instead the sound goes away, and you're just getting all these visuals. And I'm fine with it up until they keep cutting to the play. What is that saying? Again, is that his subconscious feelings about Vesper betraying him? What's the point of that? You know? And so that's where I'm like, again, maybe a step too far, but nothing that really ever becomes Liam Neeson jumping the fence.
That one doesn't bother me as much. And I actually, that scene as a whole is probably like the one memorable thing I like about this movie, unfortunately.
I think the opera scene overall is great. The whole scene is great.
Yeah.
Can I offer an opinion? I really think you people should find a better place to meet.
The thing I like about the opera scene is like, that is what we should have been doing for Spectre if we were going to continue doing Spectre. If this was going to be the Spectre movie, if we didn't even say it was Quantum, which that is another thing I hate about this movie.
This is the Spectre movie. This is the Spectre movie.
I hate the fact that they call it Quantum because they could have just saved it or not called the organization anything and just said our organization. And they just are like, no, we're going to call it Quantum because Quantum is Solace because audience dumb.
I don't know if it's dumb though. I think it's
I think it's dumb.
Secret societies are all like secret societies are a real thing, and they have like societies within societies. This is real world shit.
No, I get it, but it's less about like if you're going to restart your franchise and you have all these things that you know fans are going to like. I still to this day think, man, wouldn't that have been awesome if they didn't say what it was and then left it to another movie to fill in the holes of like, oh, it was Spectre all along.
An organization.
And just knowing that Dominic Green, I mean, hell, they didn't have to call, okay, so say they didn't call it Quantum, right? Say they just called it the Green Project. Like, what's this Green Project that we are learning about and all the people that are attached to it? Like, they could have just called it that and then left it open to later. Like,
cool.
The Green, yeah, sure, but it's like
it's just not.
It's cool. Like, but it's again, it goes along with your theme of like something that is played out as something beautiful and something that seems like it's opening your arms and something that is good, but really, as you say, the devil would be doing that.
Yes, McCurdy, but that's the client-facing arm is the Green Project, but behind the scenes, it's Quantum. That's the devilry.
Right.
And behind Quantum is Spectre.
Exactly.
Right, but they didn't have to name it that.
You have the 20/20 power of hindsight, which is
true.
They would have said Spectre if they could.
I think, yeah.
But they couldn't, so they thought it was always going to be Quantum. Once they get the rights back, they're like, Spectre is a pre-sold property, we're just going to switch it up. But again, I do think it works because in the real world, all these secret societies have secret societies within them, and they all interbreed, and they all have they all cross-connect and all that.
Are you
So
in a secret society?
It's called Ranked.
Yeah, we're gonna rank the world.
Every country in the world is in danger.
But like, leave it open
Dude,
at least.
Them not saying it in Casino was good. They had to say it in this movie because otherwise they just keep saying the organization or whatever. But the only thing I have a problem with, he finds the little earpiece thing, right? But he also finds a pin with a Q on it. The Quantum people have pins. Again, that's like my theme of the night. Is like I like all these things. And then they go one step too far, and I'm like, God damn it. But they don't take a giant leap.
There's times when Dominique is wearing that pin, and it's like, if you're going to do the cue, I think, okay, here's the thing. As a fan stepping back from not being Snooty Hat or looking at the movie and just being like, I'm a fan of James Bond, I think it's a bad choice to be like, we're going to make the name of this Quantum and then have the insignia for that organization be a Q, when what I associate with Q is gadgets and Q the character. So I'm saying as a fan, I'm like, I feel, and I know you're like, nah, that's a nitpick. And I'm like, if you're going to be smart about how you're going to approach that, don't call it Quantum. Don't even call it anything, because you didn't have to even say anything in the script. We already get the idea that they are in cahoots. We know there's something spooky going on with these higher ups, one of which has an ear in the prime minister. You know something bad's going on with these characters. I don't think you need to put a label on it.
They could have just kept saying the organization, but I don't care. The fact that it's Quantum,
Whatever.
I have no qualms with that.
Real quick, back to the edits. There's a scene before that scene that I thought was a little weird. There are times in this movie, there are shots that are cut to that I'm like, why did you add that in that edit when this movie's already like really fast, right? For a movie that they're cutting a lot out, I feel like they cut things in that aren't necessary. Like there is specifically a cutaway shot of a woman filling up a drink. And in any other movie, most movies, if you're doing that, if you're cutting to something, it's important. You need to show why would you cut to something. But when you watch the rest of the scene play out, we never see that glass of alcohol come into play later in that scene. So that makes me feel like, why do we have it in there?
I get what you mean, but this is what I mean. When you're looking for problems, you'll find them. Because that's classically called a cutaway. There's action happening, and then they cut away to something else. There's a stewardess on the flight, and she's like doling
I just feel
out
like
drinks,
it's a
right?
weird thing to be like, that's what we're going to cut to in this movie.
It'd be weird to cut to the pilot, and he's like picking his nose. That would be weird.
No, but if you're gonna cut away to anybody, you're cutting your reaction to either Felix Leiter,
I think it just
you're
shows
cutting
how
reaction
in
to
bed
Elvis.
Green is with top tier security.
To Nanz's
like,
point,
all
let's
this
put
stuff.
the snooty hat back on for a
We're
second.
just hanging out and having drinks, and hey, we scratch your back, we'll scratch yours.
If you need that to mean something, if that cutaway needs to mean something, then obviously there's a heavy emphasis on alcohol and chilling out and like a G5 jet or whatever. And all these four guys are casually talking business that is going to lead to the changing, possibly killing of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, right? And they're just sitting there boozing while they're like, hey, South America's falling like dominoes. Hey, you give us some oil, we'll look the other way on this Bolivian coup, blah, blah, blah. Hey, babe, can I get a whiskey? Yeah, and he's just pouring the whiskey.
Venezuela, Brazil, now Bolivia. With you tied up in the Middle East, South America is falling like dominoes.
Well, we can hardly be expected to do something about a coup we know nothing about.
I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to essentially just have a cutaway. But if you need it to mean something, that's what's going on in the scene, is this casual talk from these scumbags. But are they really scumbags, or is this just the way the world works? And that's ultimately why I think this movie is smart, is because it lives in the real world. Sorry, everybody else around the planet.
Let's go police the world.
Team America has once again pissed off the entire world.
Your countries are doing the same thing. They're all looking out for themselves first and foremost, and then trying to help out where they can. And when it comes to oil, everybody ruthless. Remember, that's why I like Golden Gun, because I'm like, everybody's fighting over the Solace, because we're always in an energy crisis. If the Solace existed, everybody would be cutting each other's throats to get it. So these guys are wheeling and dealing, right? They're getting in bed with a scumbag for a purpose. And we'll talk more on that later. Let's get through the editing segment. The editing is fine in the plane scene until the enemy pilot just suddenly pulls off and explodes. He just zips off into a mountain and explodes. He just zips out and into...
Why is that unclear, though? That's the product of what Bond was doing to him.
That's what I mean. It's unclear. What was Bond doing?
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think those little planes have to have a lot higher speed to maintain being in the air, right?
Okay.
Versus a big plane that has big wings, it can go slower and still stay aloft.
Okay.
So my impression is Bond, it's kind of, here's Bond, here's the plane. Bond slows way down and then also like gets on top of him and goes into like a crevice between two mountains, right? And then the guy has to like swerve to try to get out from under Bond, but he's too low because Bond has taken them really close to the mountain range.
Again, that's where you need Mathis there to be like, right now he's cutting off his drag. So
he's driving really slow and dropping his altitude.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I mean. Like, maybe the movie's too smart for me at that moment, but another movie, they would have had her up in the cockpit and she's like, what are you doing? And he's like, trust me, I'm cutting off. He's in my drag space.
We can fly slower and lower than him.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, Bond's like, okay, well, if I can't outdo him because I don't have guns on this plane, then I might as well go into where I can use my environment. I can use the mountains basically as a weapon. And so by going lower, it makes it harder for him to get around because his focus, the guy who's shooting at his focus is just shooting at him. If he's just all focused on that, he might not be focusing on what's going on around him. And so that might be the reason why he has to get out of there when he does. That scene doesn't bother me. That one does not bother me as much.
And I get what you're saying. Bond goes low and Bond's like, I'm going to fly really low and just keep going with it. But Bond's at a disadvantage there because he's so big and cumbersome that a turn for him is difficult, whereas this tiny little plane is shoom, 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 shoom. You can really meander that path. So for the guy to just suddenly peel off, that's where I'm like, wait, what just happened? Why did he just peel off into the wall? If Bond had like nudged him, had the planes touched, and because he's so big that he, that's what diverted his path. That's what I mean. Something that clearly shows it, but it's just as unclear as when Bond throws that hook. It seems like they're covering up something that's unclear with fast editing, so it's gone before you can even question it.
It's like, Uncle, what just happened? McCurdy and I interpreted it in different ways, which just goes to show that it's unclear what the intention was.
Again, Mr. Forster knows his cinema history. He intentionally made this scene. He wanted it with biplanes because he wanted it to be kind of a slight homage to North by Northwest, which is actually one of my favorite movies. But in that movie, there's a scene where the main character, he's like in a cornfield and then there's this crop duster that comes out of nowhere and it's trying to clip him. And it's very much out of nowhere, very much similar like to the scene where, he's just flying along and then this plane comes out of nowhere.
And then after that is the bar scene.
Move your ass.
Which is fine, nice and brief and to the point. The last action scene is the hotel fire, which starts out with some more of that Cuddy stuff.
You and I had a mutual friend.
And so there are moments, there are some shots where I'm like, but again, on the whole, that scene is Cuddy in the beginning, but then it's clear as to what's going on for the rest of it. But I will backtrack a little bit. I know I said that nothing ever becomes Liam Neeson jumping a fence, but there is one moment that really does feel like Liam Neeson jumping a fence, and that's when Camille is going down the stairs to fight those two soldiers. It's just all over the place. I think if it came down to it, the one that I just don't care for is the boat scene. For me, it just felt like Marc Forster wanted to check that box of his water action scene rather than something that was a little more purposeful. Like, it just feels obligatory. But all the other ones serve a purpose, and I like them, regardless of little pockets of, I wouldn't have cut it that way type of things. Once again, because we're in this new world, we don't really have Bond jokes. But we do kind of have like a half Bond joke here. So just to showcase, once again, the good old days of what a Bond joke is. A death, a killing has just occurred.
Oh, he blew a fuse.
And then it's a clever pun.
Do you mind if my friend sits this one out? She's just dead.
Classic Bond jokes. In this one, there's like a half Bond joke. He kills McCurdy's buddy. He fights that guy in the hotel room. And then he's on the phone with Tanner.
Tell us Slate was a dead end.
Slate was a dead end.
Damn him, he killed him.
He was a dead end. Is that a Bond joke? It follows the rules technically, or is it just a euphemism he's using because he's on the phone?
Well, it all I don't know if you said this. It needs to be punny, right? What's the pun?
The same joke was in License to Kill.
Oh, God, it's Heller.
Yeah, looks like he came to a dead end.
Right? Like a dead end is the end of a road, the end of a lead, but the guy's actually dead. It follows the rules.
But he's not a dead end because he does still lead him into the next.
I feel like it has to be so funny it like smacks you across the face and it's like...
It's the closest thing because that's...
It's the closest thing possible, but it's more of a euphemism than a
Charlie,
ha-ha joke.
remember when you and I were talking about how like these movies, you're like, that argument's stupid, and I was like, no, it's not, because you need to have the tropes to like these movies. That would be one where it would have been nice to have that, but whatever, it's fine.
I love
but
this
that's
movie,
what I mean. Then
but
they
there
get
just
goofy
weren't
though.
enough Bond jokes. So.
This movie is on the far end of the spectrum with Casino Royale. Nanz likes to live here. Nanz likes to be in Darkville. Yeah. So, okay.
So good. I have no glaring issues with this. I don't care about the editing issues. Do you have glaring issues minus the editing that you can point to?
I'm looking at it from the perspective of how does this movie make me feel after I watch the movie, and I feel very underwhelmed, and I'm just like, okay, that was a movie. And I'm fine with it.
I don't feel underwhelmed, but I agree that it's
I don't
forgettable.
leave the film. I don't end up watching that movie and I'm like, I feel like I was treated
You
to
don't
something.
feel whelmed.
I don't feel well
You feel
after
underwhelmed.
watching it.
My high is him driving away from Green.
I bet you make it 20 miles before you consider drinking that. Goodbye, Mr. Green.
Some of the points you say, I'm like, I get where you're coming from with this movie feeling like a chaser. Like, I think if you're a Bond fan and you're watching all these movies, I think you do have to put the little asterisk caveat and say Quantum of Solace is the movie you have to see with Casino. It has to go with
Companion
Casino.
piece.
You can't, because like
Mandatory viewing.
Charlie, you and I, we've talked about like when we started watching these movies as young kids, we watched them going to the video store and just pulling the movies from any order, not which one, but any order. We pulled the movies and we watched them and we enjoyed the shit out of them, right? This is the only one of the series, even the newer ones. Maybe we'll get there. But this is the only one in the series.
Don't talk about future movies.
Not future movies. We only got 3 left. That you're like, you really, really have to see Casino to understand this movie. And I think that might be one of the big flaws of this movie, if you're looking at it that way. It's like, you have to understand Casino to really understand this movie. And if you don't see Casino and you see this movie, I feel like you're going to be super fucking lost.
But let's go into the bad. I have a list of some bad stuff.
All right.
And these are like kind of nitpicks, kind of not. On all of these things, I can look the other way. But it doesn't exactly make sense that Vesper's boyfriend was Quantum. This is like if you're really looking at the timeline. Remember we said last episode, Mr. White found out that Vesper was going to be involved in the whole Le Chiffre thing, the whole Casino Royale thing. So they immediately got to work kidnapping somebody close to her so they could control her. But apparently she'd been dating this guy for a while.
She had a boyfriend, a French Algerian. They were very much in love. He was kidnapped by the organization behind Le Chiffre. And they blackmailed her, threatening to kill him unless she cooperated.
She had been dating a quantum agent for a while, and then she just so happened to be the one brought in for the treasury thing. Like, was that just mere coincidence? That's something where you're like, okay, the timeline had to be fudged a little bit. Same thing goes for Mathis having that house. Because how much time has passed?
Almost none.
Like a week.
They make it seem like Bond hits White, shoves him in a car, and then we're in Quantum.
Yeah.
Which we are. Here's the order of events. Bond has Mathis taken in, and then Bond has his whole starting to sail around the world with Vesper, and then Vesper dies, and M's like, well, this clears Mathis now, and he's like, no, keep sweating him.
We just proved that she's guilty, not that he's innocent. Could have been a double blind, keep sweating him.
In that same scene, he gets Mr. White's phone number. So then he goes to kneecap aside Mr. White, and then cut to this movie, direct continuation with Mr. White in his trunk. So it's like within like a week, they had Mathis set up in this house.
What do you want? Come to apologize?
Is that what happened? And now he's got this
Maybe
girlfriend?
they felt so bad.
Quest'uomo mi ha fatto imprigionare e poi mi ha fatto anche torturare. E tu adesso che fai? Gli servi del vino?
Poi quando hanno capito che non eri colpevole ti hanno anche comprato questa casa. In fondo gli devi qualcosa, no?
Possibly, but it's like
They were like,
they make it feel
just
like
give
it's
him
been
that
a while.
one villa we have.
Yeah,
Get him in there.
Is it conceivable? Sure, but it's like, damn, that's a quick turnaround. This guy goes from like being in a
That's
prison
like one
cell
of the most unbelievable things.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I do wonder, like, we never really see the time between things happening. So it's not something I'm like, I notice because you're like,
That's
well,
what
we
I
don't
mean.
know. We never know how much time has passed between specifically him going to get Mr. White. We don't know how much time passes in that scene. We don't know how much time between the horse race and then him going back to MI6 and them telling, okay, that we picked up this thing with the money. We don't know how long that's taken. So there could be potentially some time between there.
That's my point. Is like we don't know, and that's where it works. But when you question it, it's like that is that's odd. Speaking of that, another one on that note is Bond is in Austria to see the opera. Remember, he tries to catch a flight, but his cards get canceled, and then cut, and we're in Italy. And the reason he's in Italy is because now he needs Mathis's help to get fake passports and all that so he can get back to Bolivia.
I need a passport and matching credit card.
Bond had to go from Austria to Italy. He had to like
That's not
cross
that
through.
far, though. You would need the passport then.
Yeah.
So he needs the passport. He goes to Mathis
It
to
is
get.
a Dark Knight Rises. It's a Dark Knight Rises type of scenario where it's like,
But
well,
Dark
how did
Knight
he get
Rises
from...
was going from Europe to America.
Charlie, it doesn't matter the distance. It's just the fact that you have a character going from one place to another, and there's obstacles, but we skip all that, and it doesn't matter. But it's like a question of like, well, then how did he do it?
Yeah, and as an editor, I appreciate them cutting out all that bull. I'm talking story beat, where the whole thing is, I got to get to Mathis so I have a passport.
But he
managed to do it without a passport. You know, so like,
then why does he
like,
need Mathis?
Was Bond riding in the back of trucks and stuff?
Bolivia's in South America, correct? Right.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Austria is, it is literally one country away from Italy. They do border each other. So, as Nanz
like
said,
Bond could do
it would
that.
He could figure that out. I think if you're sitting in a room and you're like really thinking about it, like, it makes sense. He could get to Austria, go to Italy, but he needs to go overseas to South America. And so maybe that's where it's like he needs that. But I get your point of like, but he gets the thing to get the thing. Like, how did he get across the country? And I get it, but I don't.
We're nitpicking here. We're
that's
nitpicking.
A nitpick.
Glad I insisted you brought that cello.
Oh, and remember, according to the Living Daylights, getting into Austria is really simple, so maybe the trip from Austria to Italy is a breeze.
We've nothing to declare!
That's the cello!
The whole point here is that these are things that don't need to be answered, but that you can point them out. Like, as a story goes, Bond is immobile because he doesn't have cash, he doesn't have credit cards, but he still manages to pull off this thing. My point is, it's just a little contrived for M to suddenly cut him off.
You shot him at point blank and threw him off a roof. I'd hardly call that showing restraint, especially since he was a member of Special Branch.
So who is he guarding?
Bond, are you missing the fact that you killed a member of Special Branch? I need you to come in.
And I would. But right now, I need to find the man who tried to kill you. Go back to sleep.
Connection terminated. Restrict Bond's movements. Cancel his cards. Put an alert on his passports, all of them.
It's just a little sloppy because Bond doesn't bother explaining to M that he didn't kill the Special Branch guy.
It appears Bond shot Haynes' bodyguard and threw him off a roof.
And this is based on what, Tanner? I mean, right there's security cam footage that would have seen that it wasn't Bond that shot the guy. So then maybe Bond wanted M to think that he had killed the guy? Maybe the moment M said that, Bond thought, wait, that's not right. Why does she think that? I need to go rogue now.
And Tanner, be careful who you trust with this. Hopefully you're a better judge of character than I am.
You know, he's questioning who he can trust, so maybe he wanted to go rogue so nobody would know where he was just in case they'd been compromised. But all the same, losing his passport and credit cards didn't do him any favors, especially because it's not like rolling with Mathis kept him under the radar. MI6 still knew where he was going because they sent Strawberry to get him, and then Green invites Bond to the party, or maybe Mathis arranged it or whatever, but the point is that he's not exactly hiding from anybody, so it's all just a little loose.
You've been invited to a party.
I didn't know we had any friends here.
I arranged it.
It would have been a bit more on point if M had been forced by her higher-ups to order Bond to back off of Green. If that was the case, it would have made a lot more sense to go straight to Mathis.
Well, oddly, right now, you're the only person I think I can trust.
But it isn't until way later that this happens.
Mr. Green's interests and ours now align. Bond is running wild. Pull him in, or the Americans will put him down.
I like that Mathis comes back in, but it's kind of contrived, it's kind of forced. It's like, how do we get Bond on his own again? How do we have him go rogue again so that we have an excuse to bring in Mathis to then help him out? Another nitpick is on that boat chase, she's like, you're not one of Green's.
You're not one of Green's!
Dominic Green!
Dominic Green!
Is Dominic Green well known enough that Bond knows his name? Because then later he's like, hey, I need you to run an ID check on this guy, Dominic Green.
Name check. Dominic Green.
Might need a little more than that. There are a lot of Dominic Greens. Do you have a social security or passport number?
No.
His reaction would normally indicate that Green is a well-known figure. Like if she said, you're not one of Musk's, he'd say, Elon Musk. But we don't get that. Nobody knows who he is.
You should be getting his picture now.
Yep, that's him.
This is what I mean. They're just like little things where I'm like, why did that stay in? It's like, just take that out.
See the girl that just walked in here? Did you give her that? Tell her to call me.
He already had Green Planet from the phone tracker thing. So instead, he could have just said, name check, Green Planet. And then they say, yeah, it's headed up by this guy, Dominic. But instead, Bond somehow already knew his name.
Dominic Green!
But whatever. These aren't movie killers. They're
They
just
don't
like
matter
weird
that much.
questions. Yeah, they don't matter that much.
Thank you for your comments.
Members' comments. How do you know everybody's a member? Because they have adorable little golden guns next to their name. Okay, first up, Zach Casey 3. Do you guys like Craig's portrayal of Bond in this one and his more modern take on Bond in the remaining films? Less charm, more brute.
Hey, we got a question this time.
If you really need to know my take on it, go back to the Casino episode and watch that whole rant breaking down the Bonds. Daniel Craig
like
is the badass
British
Bond.
British,
and he's everything he does is badass, and I appreciate it.
He's so blunt. Get in.
The Entertainer says oh great. Again, I don't read these until it's time to read them. So the first word the Entertainer says is underrated! Exclamation point. Appreciate that, brother. An original take on the series with Bond being his own worst enemy. I don't agree with it's too gritty. It just feels a bit too different from other Bond films. True. It makes sense that Bond is on a hate binge considering how Casino Royale ended. True. Unlike how Diamonds made little sense after OHMSS. True. This is the first clear sense of continuity between films. True. The criticism that it's ripping off Jason Bourne is also a bit unfair. Sure, the film focuses a lot on the action, but there are some great Bond moments in there. Bond refusing to check into the cheap hotel is hilarious.
I'd rather stay in a morgue.
Entertainer. The cinematography is beautiful. It just keeps rolling. Feels more art house than popcorn action. Can't really defend the chaotic editing, but I personally don't mind or find it confusing. I think it fits the violent tone. Yes.
Did we mention the editing when we asked for comments?
No. The main issue, which is also one of the strengths of the film, is the tone. Bond doesn't feel like a hero in this one. That seems to be the general theme of the film. The CIA and MI6 are making shady deals with the villains, and Bond leaves a lot of dead bodies behind. Great stuff, really, but we haven't seen that cynical take on the franchise before. I pop this one in from time to time, and it never disappoints. However, due to its being so different from other Bond films, it rarely comes to mind. I don't mind a darker tone like License to Kill and Casino Royale, but they feel more grounded in traditional Bond tropes. Ranking it at number 12.
Dang, he touched on everything.
That was like I secretly wrote that, and I'm just pretending that it was the Entertainer.
I think you did secretly write that. I think you did
because it's
I'm
not
looking
very
at the
Bond-like.
thing, and I'm like, yeah, like I'm already looking at the ranking, and I'm like,
that's
Charlie's gonna be like, this is where it
tonight.
goes, and I'm like, all right, whatever, dude.
The username is Flavorful Chunt. Okay.
Shady. This is shady. Okay, Vuk Babalo. The idea on paper is fine, continuing the story from Casino, but the execution is really bad. First of all, if they continued the ending of Casino, why Bond isn't wearing the same suit he wore when he shot Mr. Okay. I know it's a small detail, but it's one of those things that bug me. If they're looking for a problem, they will find it. If you are doing a sequel, do it well. Also, throwing Mathis in the garbage was a bad scene. I know there was a writer's strike during filming, but I don't understand why they hurried up the movie and released it in 2 years. This movie proves that there wasn't a Craig arc planned at all. It's a solid movie. If the editing wasn't that crazy, it would rank a little bit higher. For me, it's a lower tier on the Bond list. Throwing Mathis in the garbage
makes sense.
He's trying to make it look like a
robbery. You can't just drag a dead body around with you all the time.
He puts him in the garbage, and then he steals his money out of his wallet. That's what you do when you want to make it look like a robbery. You just take the wallet out, steal the money, leave the wallet. He's throwing the police off. Obviously, it doesn't work because they're like...
Rene Mathis has been shot dead in Bolivia. The police claim it was Bond.
The guy just got shot, and the last thing he says is...
Vesper, she gave everything for you. Forgive her. Forgive yourself.
And I think it's a sweet moment. Yeah, he could have just dropped him, but I think the point was to make it look like a basic robbery, which... maybe doesn't make sense because there's dead cops too. I don't know.
I get what he's saying. I do feel it's a little clunky, but it's one of those where I'm like, what are you gonna do? Like it could have just been they left the fucking car there, or they just drove off with his body in the back of the seat and just not said anything afterwards. Like you didn't have to throw him in the trash can.
And he was shot and dying, and he was like, "Stay with me." I'd be like, "I have shit to do, man. I'm not even sticking around till you die."
It's just weird. I think it is just weird when they're like, "Yeah, we're just tossing him in the trash."
You don't mean that.
The cops toss him in the trash. Oh wait, the story's got to. Okay, well, let's just keep going. Well, we could have kept him in the car.
I think done something with him. Clunky is the word for it
again or something.
Clunky is the word for it, but I don't think it. I don't think it destroys that moment between them where he's just like,
I am destroyed. I can't watch this movie.
Because that's thematic, right? Where he's just like,
it's not thematic. It destroys the movie for me.
Forgive Vesper, forgive yourself. That is Mathis stating the theme before he dies. You could maybe have a little laugh when he dumps his body in the garbage, but again, the point was to make it look like a robbery. Whether that comes across or not, I don't know.
It doesn't. It didn't strike me as he's trying to frame it as a robbery.
He's like, he would have done it.
Is that how you treat your friends?
He wouldn't care.
He would have done it to me.
He wouldn't have cared. Whatever.
No. We made a pact years ago.
When you put another man's cock in your mouth, you make a pact. A bond that cannot be broken.
If ever one of us finds the other one's dead body, you put it down the garbage chute immediately, okay? After ripping it, we didn't see when Bond performed a necrophilic act on Mathis.
He's a man so dedicated that he will get down on his knees and put that cock right in his mouth.
We're going to get so hard demonetized.
Too much.
Lemmy is God says, like Tomorrow Never Dies, this is enjoyable as a big, dumb action movie. Correction, big, smart, dumb action movie, okay? For Craig, I think it beats Spectre and probably No Time to Die. What are those? On your list, I predict it will land somewhere near Diamonds, and personally think it edges out Diamonds unless you are docking it for not being a traditional Bond movie, as Diamonds is far more Bond than this.
Chuck, I will tell you this right now. It's not near Diamonds. And I'm looking at that list, I'm like, yeah, it's better than Diamonds. It's better than Moonraker.
It's too low.
Like, even me, I'm like, no, I don't think this movie's, I think you give this movie...
He's part of the reason it's underrated.
I think you give this movie too much credit, but I will say, I think it's better than Diamonds. I can't not say that, right? Like, if we were looking at these movies in a vacuum...
Like we just said, here's a scene that is both touching and clunky. That's all wrapped up in this thing where it's like, it's good, but flawed. We've been saying that from the get-go.
This movie's better than Diamonds. It's better than Moonraker.
Yeah. The movie is full of great action sequences. The excessive cuts are bad, but do not make the movie unwatchable. The movie looks great, and Craig looks particularly great as Bond. The story needed some more work. It didn't really pick a lane. Is it primarily a personal revenge movie for Bond and Camille? Seems like that was the goal, but if so, Bond's personal revenge plot doesn't get enough screen time relative to the ostensible MacGuffin.
That is what I'm talking about.
Quantum scheme.
That is what I'm talking about. That is what I'm talking about with this movie. That is what I'm talking about this movie. I think the movie goes so fucking hard on Bolivia that they're like, we got to talk about fucking Bolivia. We got to talk about this goddamn water. We got to talk about this oil because that's what's happening in this world. But I'm like, great, But at the end of the day, you still want to go back to Bond's revenge plot.
That's all wrapped up in that moment when Bond says we're both using green to get to somebody.
I think it would have been better if they kept it streamlined.
We're both using green to get to somebody.
Shut the fuck up,
He needed
Chuck.
to get to green.
I don't care.
Figure out Vesper's boyfriend thing
If
and
that
everything
was the
about
case,
quantum.
it would have been like a mid thing that would have happened, and then we would have gotten to the real thing. I think if they had wanted to focus this movie, I think it would have done the movie a service. Get f***ed. Sayonara.
I don't know. I don't even know what the fix would be because it's all wrapped
Don't
up. Don't
make Green such an important
It all leads to
character.
Russia.
Don't make
the whole
Green
thing leads
such
to
an
Russia
important-
by the end.
All right. Keep going.
Green is
Keep
the main villain. We got to deal with this.
Don't make him the
motherfucker,
main
and
villain.
Then we move on to
Keep going.
The cherry on top is the Vesper stuff at the end. Okay,
Nanz, don't be doing your little like sitting there being a little like I like this movie. Shut the f up, Nanz. Shut up with your.
Are you gonna let me finish this or not?
All right, go
Even
ahead,
so,
go ahead.
the scheme is also a bit difficult to follow and could have used some more exposition. I also like the corrupt CIA aspect / Greg Beam character and wish it had been explored a little more. Camille is a pretty good Bond girl, similar narrative arc to For Your Eyes Only. Yeah, we said that. And I think it works here. Green is an okay villain. I think he's a great villain. He comes across as a psychopath, but seems to be middle management in his organization, which undermines his gravitas. Elvis is a candidate for worst henchman of all time.
Elvis?
Elvis, the guy with the really shitty bowl haircut.
That Strawberry Fields trips down the stairs?
Yeah.
We see that the shitty bowl haircut is actually a toupee. It falls off at the bottom of the stairs.
Elvis?
And then he's got the neck brace later.
Yeah, they gave him like homosexual undertones. He was always looking at guys.
I never caught that. His haircut, mostly.
The more you say that, Charlie, it does like because we were talking about that plane scene, and Marc Forster was talking about North by Northwest. Because some people call that movie like the proto Bond film, right? Because there's some elements that feel very Bond-esque. And in that movie, the villains are also got some kind of sexual tension that you're like him and like his little minion or whatever. And like now you say that, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what he was doing with Dominic Green and Elvis. Is there's a little bit of that. They're like, there's a little
But it's
sexual
never
tension between them.
It's always between him and somebody else.
Yeah, it's like Elvis wants to Dominic Green, but Dominic Green's not having it. He's like, I'd rather something else.
Elvis is looking at Felix at one point, and Felix is like, brother, I ain't having none of that. Everybody's looking at Elvis like he's a weirdo, because he is a weirdo.
When we were talking about our weird edits, there's that edit in the movie when they're at the opera. They spend a little bit of time of just him cutting back and forth, him looking at the other hench guy, and they're
Other
like,
henchman, yeah.
The other henchman's like, no, dude,
What?
I'm not
How
there.
did I miss this?
I remember that part.
I really think that Green is like this whole thing of him being middle management.
I agree with that.
That was the same. That's the point. That's the same thing people said last time about Lashif, and it's like, yeah, Lashif is also not Blofeld, but we're not talking about Blofeld. We're talking about guys underneath Blofeld.
Yeah.
So what? In the first movie or the second movie, we're gonna jump straight to the head of the organization. This is a natural progression, and I think Green is just as underrated as this movie.
I think Green is a good bad guy.
He is the perfect smiling devil. The devil doesn't come at you with horns. The devil comes at you with a smile. One of my favorite quotes on that point from Lord of the Rings, yes, Lord of the Rings, is they meet Strider, and they're like, this guy might be a bad guy, and Frodo says, no, I think
a servant of the enemy would look fairer. Feel fouler.
The point there being that the devil doesn't come to you with horns and a pitchfork because you would go, that's a devil. Get away from me, devil. He comes at you with a smile. But in this, that smile is yellow, showing that there's something off with him. I just think that Green
he's
is like
I'm
the
just
perfect
trying
snake.
to save the world with all this hydrogen power. But really, I'm trying to control all the water.
Yes, which is what, as you said, McCurdy, that's what the oil companies do. They're like, we're green. Every company is like, we're so green. Look how green we are. It's all bullshit. I work for these companies. They know that it's all a lie. They're like, hey, in this commercial, the analytics show that people buy packaging that's green because it makes them feel good. Oh, is there any truth to that? No. We never stop doing what we do. We just pretend because it sells better.
I got it.
That's how the fucking world works. So this guy is the same thing where he goes on these speeches about we're going to save the world. Meanwhile, he's trying to control this motherfucker.
You see, I am about to have an elaborate peace ceremony. And while all the world's most important people are distracted here, I will detonate the WMDs.
Okay.
So anyway, Lemmy has got also spammed a bunch of Dolphumanoid emojis. So
good for him.
Get your merch down below.
Dolphumanoids, we are the future.
L for love.
L for love.
Spectre Chair Engineer says, barely holds together as a coherent movie. Feels like they chopped out whole shots, scenes, and sequences, then played the movie at 1.5 speed. Shirley Bassey being snubbed for Jack White should have cost all involved their careers. She's had enough.
We didn't even
songs.
talk about the song.
She's
really,
had
right?
enough. The plot, despite being more grounded, is dumb as dirt. The CIA will kill Green as soon as they find out he played them, which he even acknowledges without having a solution. That's not a plot hole.
Where do the Americans stand?
Well, the CIA doesn't care about another dictator as long as they get their hand. But when they find out that they've been duped,
I'm working on that.
I don't think that's an issue. I think these people know they're untouchable, and that's the essence of Spectre.
Dominic Green's going to suck this place dry, and then he's going to move on, and you're going to be left picking up the broken crockery.
Yeah, the CIA might want to kill Green, but like the CIA isn't God. After he does his play, he moves to another country. That's how Spectre works. That's like being like, oh, they were just going to kill Blofeld. Well, yeah, you got to find him first. Wondering what the good guys are going to do to you after you do the bad thing, that's not a plot hole. That's just like something to be dealt with after the movie takes place. You think he gives a about the CIA at the end of the day? No.
You really don't know anything about us.
Why would M sanction Bond for killing a crooked MI6 agent when she knows for a fact Quantum has deeply infiltrated MI6? Lots of holes like this.
So who are you working for?
So the bodyguard wasn't MI6, he was Special Branch, which is MI5, which is like if a member of the CIA killed an FBI agent or a policeman. You can't just do that on a whim because they're bodyguarding someone who may be corrupt.
Guy Haynes, Special Envoy to the Prime Minister.
All M knows is that one of her bodyguards was Quantum, but beyond that, they can't just start executing cops based on
punches and innuendo.
Sure, Bond has his trusty license to kill, but he's still supposed to follow M's orders, and M clearly doesn't care so much about the bodyguard as much as she's worried that the death of Vesper is driving Bond to kill everyone he comes into contact with. So her wanting to rein him in does make sense, but I stand by what I said previously about the whole thing being a contrived excuse to bring back Mathis. Some great moments in here and a raw, angry energy that comes across in the cynical dialogue and brutal action. I can only enjoy Quantum of Solace as a specimen rather than another adventure I can truly love. K1 says, I wish it wasn't so ashamed of being a Bond movie. A lot of great ideas, but everything goes so fast and the shaky action leaves very few memorable moments. To your point, McCurdy. I enjoy the corrupt CIA. Green is great as just a Nestle executive stealing water, hiding behind environmentalism to go unnoticed. Most believable villain. To my point. Opera is peak of the movie. Yes, trying to have twist of it's not about oil is so meh.
How much oil did the Americans promise you?
This isn't about oil.
Well, that's good, because there isn't any.
It's about trust.
It's about trust.
I don't think the movie needed a twist. It would have been better with a more straightforward mission.
Thank you.
I think that's just. I don't think it's like it's not like a super heavy twist.
I don't register anything as a twist.
I think it's just overindulging and it's trying to be super clever when these movies work better when they're a little more clear. That has been my point tonight. That has been my point this whole time.
I think it is clever. I think that is
I'm
clever.
saying sometimes when you're trying to be too clever.
He's tricking all these countries into thinking he has oil because they're going to do whatever he wants because it's oil. But then at the end of the day, it's water, which they might be like, who gives a fuck about water? No, that is the most precious liquid on the planet. To control it, it's like why fucking Bill Gates is buying up all this farmland. Oh, who cares about farmland? No, to control these things, that is a vested interest in longevity. Last episode, we talked so much about The Big Short. Remember the message at the end of The Big Short? What's his name is buying up a bunch of interest in water. Controlling that is huge. We can live without oil, but we can't live without water.
He blames the water shortage on global warming.
This is exactly what evil people do. They foment a problem, and then they turn around and ask the people for the power to defeat that problem they in fact created, which they then exacerbate for even more power. And people have been giving into this devilish trick forever.
He's dynamite. This used to be a riverbed. He's creating a drought.
You know, there are people in this country spending half their paycheck just to get clean water. What do you think of that?
The Bolivian government is the problem. They cut down the trees, then act surprised when the water and the soil wash out to sea.
Why don't you tell them about all the land you bought up outside Potosi? Somehow, the logging rights went to a multinational corporation that cut down the forests. But only after our last government sold the land to Green Planet. Or have I got my facts crossed?
Yes, I think you did.
Show us what you're doing, Kim Jong-il!
Do something, Eric Barron!
The global warming and corporate America.
You are worthless, Eric Barron!
So this slimy bastard that's pretending to be an environmentalist is pulling a classic devilish trick where he promises what you think you greatly desire, but then flips that desire on its head before getting away with your soul. Hey, anybody want an apple?
We do nothing to stop a coup in Bolivia, and in exchange, the new government gives America the least any oil found.
If it's oil you want.
We didn't find diamonds, did you?
He's weaponizing greed by dangling oil, a substance that humans want but don't need, in the face of the powers that be to trick them into bending over backwards to please and pamper him and let him do whatever he wants.
It's James Bond, British Secret Service.
I will need you to get rid of him for me.
That's not gonna be a problem.
While secretly robbing them of something they need but completely take for granted. That's great. That goes right back to From Russia with Love, where Spectre tricked Bond into retrieving the Lecter for them by baiting him with a hot babe. I think that's clever. I don't think that's something to be downplayed. Qwerty Manor says, Quantum of Solace, or Quantum of Solace, as the haters like to call it, is the most underrated movie of the series, my man. Maybe it's not underrated, maybe it's overhated. Sure. There's something about this movie that makes people hate it, and I really don't know why. You and the entertainer, man. Maybe it's because this movie is a lot of 1 step forwards, 2 steps back. Maybe I can unpack why people don't like it. Here we go. The opening chase is exciting, but why are goons chasing him? How do they know that Bond has Mr. White? It seems like Mr. White was just chilling at his nice lakeside house when Bond shot him at the end of Casino Royale. If they're looking for a problem, they will find it.
Tell me where he is.
He's everywhere.
The whole essence of Spectre is that they're everywhere and know everything. So is it that crazy that they would know that Mr. White had been taken?
What the hell is this organization, Bond? How can they be everywhere and we know nothing about them?
I told you what you wanted to know about Quantum.
Yes, you did. And your friends would know that, so they're probably looking for you.
Why are there barely any people? In Casino Royale, there are a lot of people after they discover Solange is dead. I guess they wanted to keep Mr. White a secret. Whatever, Mitchell ruined it anyways. People complain about the simple convenience of the plot, Bond getting the briefcase from the hotel, Camille showing up at the right time. I don't know about that one. It's pretty clear that she's waiting for him. That's why she pulls up and then says, "You're late."
You're late.
But in Casino Royale, Demetrius checking his text in front of the camera so Bond can see him on the camera isn't a problem. Okay, whatever. I guess we can talk about the villains. Dominic Green is really underrated bad guy. He's so creepy and slimy and smart, but his introduction is baffling. Let's just show our bad guy randomly stamping some random sheet, whatever it is. Amazing introduction. I love how he manipulates Medrano, and his cover as an environmentalist is great too. Shades of Gustav Graves there, yeah. But then we get to the worst part of Quantum, and quite possibly the worst thing in Bond history. Elvis the henchman. He was so bad I didn't even remember he was in the movie the first couple times I watched it. I had to look his name up on IMDb. Why does he have a toupee? Is that supposed to be some sort of dig at Sean Connery? Or is that some weird Marc Forster humor? He even gets tripped by our sacrificial lamb Bond girls, Strawberry Fields Forever. For some reason, people like this character. I don't know why. Yeah, let's send this hot young redhead secretary to try to rein in James Bond. Yeah, okay. She falls for the weirdest pickup line ever.
I can't find the stationery. You come and help me look.
Yeah, that's why she laughs, because it's so bold and obvious. It's like pure Bond. Anyway, she dies to serve the plot, I guess. I forgot to mention Felix later. He's on the plane with Jim Hopper for some reason. At least he has a cool scene with Bond and gets the promotion at the end. Uh-oh, now we get to the most controversial scene in the movie. Mathis in the dumpster. A perfect example of 1 step forwards, 2 steps back, I said earlier. First, Mathis is in the trunk and Bond gets him out. The cops shout, "He's moving!" Of course he's moving. Bond is moving him. After Bond hits the cops, he asks if Mathis is his real name. Bond says, not a very good cover, is it?
Is Mathis your cover name?
Yes.
Not a very good one, is it?
What? Well, of course it's not a very good cover. You're an Italian guy pretending to be French. Even though it's an emotional scene, why is Mathis so invested in Bond and Vesper's romance? Mathis was betrayed by Bond, and he was tortured and probably probed in his butt because of Bond. I guess he still wants Bond to be happy. Anyways, Bond throws him in the dumpster and says he wouldn't care. Of course he would care. If someone threw me in the dumpster, I would care. But you have to remember this is a direct sequel to Casino. Mathis says just because one is dead doesn't mean one still can't be useful. After Fields is found dead, Bond gets his license revoked in a scene similar to License to Kill, where Bond is still trusted by M. Speaking of License to Kill, I'm about to say something that will make fanboys hate me and probably get me banned from this channel and the Bond community. I think this movie is better than License to Kill. Quantum doesn't have a terrible tone. The production value is terrible in License to Kill. No silly ninjas or Colonel Heller's subplot. License to Kill depends on Sanchez not being suspicious of Bond or the fact that he has a bunch of money. It's way too convenient that Colonel Heller knows he quit being an agent but doesn't know he had his License to Kill revoked, or that it's weird it happened just a couple days ago. The whole plot only happens because Dario isn't there to notice Bond. Then again, Quantum's big plot gets revealed because they conveniently parachute into it. The end of License to... Well, they set up the sinkhole.
That's a sinkhole. There are a few around here.
The end of License to Kill is a joke. Hey, Bond, talk to M. You got your license back. Let's go fishing, yo, even though my wife just got murdered. We have to talk about the big elephant, the editing. It's bad, but not as bad as people say. I don't know if it's bad or it's there to cover Marc Forster's weird style, but it works for me to make the scenes more intense. The weirdest editing part is the first Mathis scene. It just cuts to a random shot of Bond drinking his wine. That's emphasizing that Bond is drunk like the whole f***ing movie. I know it's there to signify that Mathis has already decided to come, but it's weird. Mathis is excellent, especially in that scene on the plane. I think the part that's the worst is the ending. It's rushed. They show Bond giving the oil can to Green, then it cuts to Bond and Camille kissing, then it goes to Kazan, Russia. I don't think it's that rushed.
That's not actually what happens. Like, there's a little bit more. He's wrong. He's actually wrong in that. Like, it's not just a cut to this, cut to that. There's more to it.
The whole ending, I think, is handled very well. It's like, oh yeah, Vesper Lynn. We have to resolve that story. No, the whole thing is leading... he had to get Green so he could find Vesper's boyfriend.
That is what I agree... Here's the thing, Charlie. That's what I agree with, and I think that's why I feel the way I do. Is it feels like... It feels... Which you don't like that word. You don't like the word feels. You have to have things behind it. But it feels like after you...
No, I do.
When you watch the end of that movie, it does feel like the movie was like, oh, wait, yeah, Vesper. Like, that's... how it feels. And yes,
You're forgetting the moment where he said, I need Green to find the guy who betrayed Vesper.
I don't care.
That's
if I'm writing a movie,
story.
Listen, if I'm writing a movie where it's domino pieces and you have to go to that, and this one giant fucking domino piece is like the most of the movie,
Green
and then I completely forget about everything.
Boyfriend. He cannot get Vesper's boyfriend until he gets Green.
But it is more about the size of what that domino piece is. And for me, it's like you got this giant domino piece, which is Dominic Green and his whole Bolivian subplot with the water. It's a subplot, right? It's not a subplot, but whatever. It's about water and oil and all this bullshit.
You're saying that Bond should have ignored all of that?
It takes up so much time of the movie, and then when we get to the personal stakes of him...
That is the movie because it's
not.
quantum.
But then,
it's Spectre.
but you said that's the movie. But is it that, or is it that the fact that he gets he finds out more about Vesper, the guy that
his
she was
motivation? He finds this.
That's
whole
why it's
plot,
not clear. That's why I don't like this movie.
No,
that
it's
much.
crystal clear. His whole motivation to take on this whole plot is so that he can get green to both defeat the organization that was behind Le Chiffre.
I got it.
Right now, I need to find the man who tried to kill you.
So what's your interest in Green?
Well, amongst other things, he tried to kill a friend of mine.
A woman?
Yes. But it's not what you think.
Your mother?
She likes to think so.
Because, of course, he's going to fight that organization and continue to fight them.
I got it.
But also, the cherry on
Chucky,
top is he
it.
gets to find Vesper's motherfucking piece of shit boyfriend.
Yeah, I got it.
How are you guys saying that they're not connected? Are you fucking blind? It's all there.
It just feels like an after fact, especially since we spend so much goddamn time with Dominic Green and then we have to go to Vesper.
It is throughout.
I've heard so much about you from Vesper. The real shame is that if she hadn't killed herself, we would have had you too. I think you would have done anything for her.
I was sorry to hear about Vesper. I think she loved you.
Right up until the moment she betrayed me.
She died for you.
I have pills for everything. Some make you taller. Some make you forget.
How much do you know about Bond, Camille? Because he's rather a tragic case. His MI6 says he's difficult to control. Nice way of saying that everything he touches seems to wither and die.
You two do make a charming couple, though. You're both, what's the expression? Damaged goods?
Vesper. She gave everything for you.
Seems we're both using Green to get to somebody.
You lost somebody?
I did, yes.
Look how well your charm works, James. They'll do anything for you, won't they? How many is that now?
Sounds like you just lost another one. I answered your questions. I told you what you wanted to know about quantum.
I don't think the dead care about vengeance.
I wish I could set you free. But your prison is in there.
It's a beautiful necklace. Did he give it to you?
Throughout, we're both using Green to get to somebody. He says, it's like, oh yeah, Vesper Lind, we have to resolve that story. But the scene itself is magnificent. Sit down.
Sit down.
He doesn't kill the boyfriend, which means he's matured. The finale line is brilliant. M, I need you back. Bond, I never left. Brilliant. Yes.
Yes.
The whole movie, the question is he doing it for revenge or for duty and it's duty? That's true. The whole thing is like, M's like, you're doing it for revenge. He's like, bitch, I'm doing it for duty, but like kind of revenge too. To make a long review short, if you don't like the movie because of a writer's strike or quick editing, then I can't really say anything besides get over it. It's not a terrible movie. It's just an undercooked movie with some crazy editing. Rank. It's not too bad to be the bottom, but not good enough to be the middle. Personal list, it's top 10, but for objective rank, it's probably just below The Living Daylights. I think that was I disagreed with some of it, but that's a pretty objective book. That
I have
wrote,
a question.
Cordy.
Do people really notice editing so much? It's like
Yes.
everyone has mentioned the editing, but I'm curious if they like look up reviews of the movie before they make their own
No, I do
comments.
think
It's
people-
only because everybody thinks they're a genius because they can draw a line between this and The Bourne Identity. Oh, I know what inspired it, so it's bad.
No.
Do you know
I don't
why
even
bungee
look
jumping
at
was
that.
in
I don't think
GoldenEye?
about it.
When you
Because
jump
bungee
between
jumping
this
was a
movie,
big
it doesn't
trend.
matter if you see
that
this
means
movie between
bungee
the last
jumping
movie,
in the
you can
movie
see-
was
you can definitely
bad
see that.
because it was a trend.
Oh my God,
Anything
Chuck.
that's a trend that's then in the movie make it bad. No, I think it works fine, other than everything we laid out already.
No, I don't necessarily think that. I do think people see the movie and they probably don't like the editing. And I do think people in other movies, it's when you see jarring or weird edits, it does stick out, and some people don't like that.
I mean, like I said, I do notice jarring and weird edits, and I don't notice them in this one.
I definitely saw them.
It's literally only during action scenes. It's not during like any dramatic scenes.
But in action scenes, you expect those weird and quick cuts. So
and that's my point.
Charlie, I'd get your points about like, it's not that bad, because I think it is one of those things where you think about it and then you watch it and you're like, okay, it's not super terrible. But then when I remember the boat scene, I'm like, yeah, the boat scene's kind of bad.
For me, it's not the editing so much as it feels like such a Tomorrow Never Dies, just like, well, we gotta have an action scene here versus something that's a little more motivated. Bond literally just rams a boat into another boat, and it's just like, why are we doing this? Why didn't you just follow them or watch them or something? Like, did you have to do that? It just seems like going through the motions versus something that you're really invested in. But at the same time, I do appreciate when it comes up later, because Camille tells Bond, you ruined my chance for revenge. That's kind of a nice touch.
So when I pulled you off the boat,
I waited years for that chance.
I apologize.
And then I guess some people might have complaints of the artsiness of the opera scene. I still like the opera scene overall. Like, I don't really hate that scene.
That's a good one.
I like the opera scene.
It's like Mary Goodnight, when I'm like, Mary Goodnight is there to annoy you on purpose. And McCurdy, you're like, I don't care if it's there to annoy me on purpose. It just annoys me. You're like, the editing's frantic. I'm like, it's supposed to be frantic, right? But you're like, I don't care if it's supposed to be frantic. I just don't like it. So I get it. I understand. That's where like that's why you and I are on opposite ends of the frame, because if we were too close, we would hit each other. To Nanz's point, though, the sticking point of this movie is the editing. But it's the editing is a complicated situation, because to just say it's bad undermines the times when it's good. And then to say it's fine undermines the times that it's confusing as hell. So it's complicated, and that's why at the end of the day, it is a flawed film, but it's not you're not ready to throw it in the garbage. Andrew A, aka AJ the Noob, who traditionally has pretty much just always claimed this movie sucks major ass. Let's see what he has to say.
All right. This movie sucks major ass. That's what he first says. Is that what he says?
I've always said this, and I will say it again.
He's been very excited to talk trash about this movie.
Okay.
He's probably gonna message me personally and be like,
you're
bro. Yeah, you're a chunt. Anyway, so flavorful though,
but still a chunt.
Let me first preface by saying I don't mind when Bond does new things or chases a trend. It's just a sad coincidence that every time they try to do it, it ends up failing abysmally. Not always. Quantum is easily the worst of it because it negatively affects the movie at its core. That I agree with. A terrible shaky camera and 50 different shots during the peak of action where we get the most random cuts to a horse race or opera. The camera actively hates the viewer, and you can tell the director is trying to assert his superiority on the audience in the worst ways. Go back to a Connery-era movie like the Grant fight, and imagine with every punch you get an outside shot of the train moving faster and faster. That's what this piece of shit director would do to just shit on some solid action. The best thing about Quantum is that there's no reason to ever watch that movie. It brings absolutely nothing to the table. There is no other Eon Bond movie in which you can say this. I don't even know what the plot is, nor do I care, because it's literally unwatchable. At least movies like Die Another Day or You Only Live Twice can have some enjoyable, so bad it's good moments. Can someone correct me? What at all is exciting about Quantum? I can't think of a single thing where I'm like, oh, that's a cool concept, or that's enjoyable to see in Bond. This movie is dead last next to Casino 1967 in my book.
You would disagree because you are a chunt. You're a chunt. Yeah, I don't necessarily. Here's the thing. I don't agree with him necessarily.
He puts us at dead last.
I wouldn't put it at dead last. Like, I'm looking at our list and I'm like, yeah, this movie. Here's the thing. Like, we talked about some other movies. It's like the execution versus the, putting the execution versus like the story and all this other stuff. There is some better execution done in this film than some of the older films. Like, it's going to happen eventually. You get to a point where you're like, yeah, there's a little more thought. There's a little more process put in it. So it's like, Yes, I know the editing is not always everyone's favorite thing, and I'm on that boat. But at the same time, I'm like...
That's why it's not sitting up there with its companion piece. It's not going to be at number 3, chilling next to Casino Royale. That's not in the cards. Again, I just want to reiterate that when it comes down to it, the whole point of this experiment is can we reason as men? Can we set aside our emotions, weaponize our emotions, but set them aside ultimately to figure out the greatest ranking ever? Something that isn't just there because we felt a certain way, but we can actually state with our words, we can state why every movie is where it is. That being said, I so thoroughly appreciate your move here to try to place this movie objectively, knowing that you may not like it, and we all are saying that it has flaws, but it is underrated. So for me, I kind of landed at, I'm like, somewhere above Tomorrow Never Dies, right? This isn't a big, dumb action movie. It's a smart, sometimes dumb action movie.
Yeah.
You know, with some dumb action moments, but it is a smart movie. Both are follow-ups to beloved installments that are something of a letdown, but this isn't the big, dumb action movie. It's a smart movie that also uses action as a crutch, just like T&D. It defeats the Thunderball threshold for me. Thunderball has always been a threshold. It defeats that for me.
I'm torn. Here's the thing. I'm more torn now that I'm thinking about it more. I'm like, Honor and Majesty's Secret Service is a lot more memorable for me. And I think it's memorable for more people in general. And that's where I'm like...
We don't care about anybody outside of this threesome, though.
No, I know. But I think...
Other than members.
I'm still thinking... Now I'm thinking about it more, and I'm like... But for Honor and Majesty's Secret Service, we have a great Blofeld. We have probably the best Blofeld we get in any of the fucking movies. I think so. I think the movie also, it doesn't lean into the gadget that most of these other movies do, which is, I think, actually kind of a plus.
No gadget.
But that's a Bond element. Some people be like, but it's not a Bond movie if it doesn't have gadgets. I need everything.
But I do feel like Honor and Majesty's Secret Service does lend itself to being more of a I know you're gonna say like, well, it's a more Bond movie, blah blah blah. But I don't know. I do feel torn. I do feel torn to be like it's better than Honor and Majesty's Secret Service because I'm kind of like in my heart of hearts I can't really say that. I can't.
Let me continue though.
No, I can't.
If I were to put it above Secret Service, it'd be because Secret Service has story trouble, not form trouble. It's a pretty solid movie. Yeah, it plays with editing a little here, but it's not the form, it's the story I have problems with. This movie has form trouble, not so much story trouble. The story is clear. Bond seeking revenge by flushing out Spectre. Quantum. Call it what the you want. Last episode, we really equated Secret Service with Casino Royale. So if you're kind of looking at it on that, if you're looking at those as equivalents, the follow-up that Honor Majesty's Secret Service should have been something like Quantum of Solace. But instead we got Diamonds Are Forever, which was essentially a rejection of Secret Service in favor of a comedy. And y'all know I love my Diamonds Are Forever.
Stupid.
But everything they did in the opener was shameful next to what Quantum does for Casino.
Yeah.
Bond seeking revenge, but in the end finding solace and then going back to work, hence the line, I never left, right? Secret Service is vaguely about wanting to leave the service, but arguably maybe they didn't nail that theme so much. And then Diamonds Are Forever opens with Bond getting revenge for Tracy's death in the wake of Secret Service.
Where is Ernst Stavro Blofeld?
However, the death of Tracy is completely ignored in Diamonds Are Forever. It never comes up. Her name's never mentioned at all, even though Bond is pursuing the very man who killed her.
Well, that's a neat trick.
Secret Service, the thematic stuff is watered down and weak, whereas here, it's all there. It's all Bond reeling after the loss of his own Tracy, after Vesper, right? And that's where the story elements are there. The form is what's off. Oh, the editing is bad. Oh, there's some you and I have talked about this. This is, I think, the one difference is I do feel like you and I talk about form versus the story and the thing, and you're like, well, the story is what's matter. I'm like, yeah, I know, but if you can't tell that story well, then get the out of here. And that's where I'm like, that's the question. The question is, did they tell this poorly just because they had a couple bad edits here and there? Yeah. And I think I still do think that Honor Majesty's Secret Service tells at least the story better, even if it's not as strong as what you think of Quantum. But I do think Quantum just like
it drowns itself in trying to be intellectual, or like it drowns itself in being intellectual and not being entertaining. And that's where I feel like Majesty's Secret Service shines, is that it is very entertaining, even if it doesn't always lend to the intellectual elements that you probably wanted. And that's where I'm like, I think Honor Majesty's Secrets has slight edge there, where it's like, I can go back and watch Honor Majesty's Secret Service hundreds of times, and I think it's still a more entertaining movie. It does try to have more emotional moments, but it's more in the romantic side of things rather than being like this movie that is talking about real world things that are going on in the world. And that's where I feel like that's where I'm like, it's in that right there. It's like right there. And I just think that Majesty's Secret Service at least knows what it's doing. And it's like, we're at the end of the day, we're still an entertaining movie. We're still about entertainment. I think that's the problem with Quantum. Okay. The problem with Quantum is not the editing. The problem with Quantum is it's trying to be too damn smart and forgets that it's trying to be entertainment.
This is where we check each other, because I'm like, I want smart. I like that. I want smart. The movies that I put at the top are the smarter ones.
We gotta have both.
I'm here for story and bad guy, and then you remind me that it's not always about story and bad guy. Sometimes it's about entertainment.
And I think but if you look at Goldfinger and Goldeneye, if you look at Goldfinger and Goldeneye, right? Like Goldeneye is both. Goldeneye has a smart story that does actually deal with real world stuff, but it's still fucking entertaining as hell. Gold, and as well as I think Casino has entertainment, but it also is a smart story. I think this one is just trying too hard to be smart story. And yes, there is some action in that kind of, and I mean, of course, there's still action in these movies. I just think by the end of the movie, I'm like, I felt like I wasn't entertained, and I felt like I was given a homework assignment.
Like I said, it defeats Thunderball threshold for me. It defeats it. Because, editing bad. Who cares? It defeats Thunderball threshold. I knew, of course, going into this, me threatening, because I know you don't really like this movie, but threatening Secret Service would almost be like a personal move. For me, you nailed me. Upwards of number 10. Like at least above Tomorrow Never Dies and Thunderball is where I'm at.
But to put a ceiling on it, it can't surpass
The World
Man
is
with
Not
the
Enough.
Golden Gun.
The World is not enough. It can't surpass
Don't
The
know
World is
about
not enough.
Dr. No either.
I could
World
live.
is not enough.
I could live below The World is not enough, above Thunderball. The thing that I keep going back to, though, for you, McCurdy, is two things. I know I said I'm tired of the argument, but Bond-isms plus memorability. And you've said throughout this recording, you've said this movie just isn't that memorable. I like my high-minded, not just good versus evil, but like just real-world political stuff. I understand that isn't as memorable or entertaining, and sometimes having a good old-fashioned evil for the sake of evil, bad guy for the sake of bad guy is good. And then, of course, the Bond stuff. If this ended up at 13, I'd be okay. If it ended up at 10, I'd be okay.
Yeah.
10, 11, 12, 13.
We're in the right ballpark. We are like, that's the right ballpark for this movie.
It is a middle movie. It deserves to be in the middle.
I agree.
Yeah, because most lists would try to throw this to the bottom. I'm agreeing with you to the point of like, yeah, this movie's smarter than I think people give it credit for, besides the flaws. But my argument is, if you're going to bog somebody down with a homework assignment on how intricate the plot is, then you've missed the point of entertainment. And that at the end of the day, James Bond is still entertainment. So you have to balance both of those things. That's why I think Goldeneye is a perfect balance of those things, because yes, we do get the Cold War representation and like the real world stakes of what was actually going on in the world. But at the same time, we do get a very entertaining movie. And I do think like the higher movies do demonstrate like you can have both. You can have a really deep, intricate story, and you can have a lot of entertainment. I think Honor Majesty's Secret Service is a good balance, because in the sense that it is trying to give more of it's trying to break that mold of just like Bond saves the day, and like asking questions about the character of Bond, much like this movie does, or much like Casino does. Maybe it fails at it, but at the same time, I'm still looking at it like, I like the skiing scenes. I like the scene where he's getting chased in the snow in the car and he's getting kissed. I like every scene in that movie. I feel like I'm way more entertained overall. And that's why I'm like, I think it's better than Thunderball, but I don't think it's better than Honor Majesty's Secret Service.
I think that's all well put. I agree with everything you just said. My whole thing is I just think everybody out there needs to shut the f*** up about Quantum and enjoy it for what it really is and not put it at the bottom. Because
it's not at the
whether it's problems with form or content, I think if you have problems with the form, okay. If you have problems with the content / story, I don't think you understand it. And so it doesn't deserve to be at the bottom. It deserves to be at the middle. It's underrated. So if it's underrated and it's at the bottom, generally, underrated means it should be more at the middle. So at the middle would be right below Secret Service, which is Secret Service is more like a casino movie. It's got that whole thing of like Bond questioning what he wants to do, but also having classic Bondian elements to it, including the best Bond joke ever told.
He had lots of guts.
I think it is fair, and Nanz, let us know if you agree, because again, Can't Pass World's not enough. Love me some View to a Kill. Love me some For Your Eyes Only. Question some Secret Service, but still respect that movie. But I gotta see this movie above Thunderball. So the perfect spot might just be right there at the big 1-3. Number 13.
Yeah, that's not far off from where I'm at. I also use The World Is Not Enough as a ceiling that I don't think it should or could breach. And then going down the list, I personally could see it above A View to a Kill or For Your Eyes Only. On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Thunderball also have historically served as barriers.
Thresholds.
I definitely see it above Tomorrow Never Dies, though, which I know is like kind of a big range. Like I said, I could see it at 10, just below World Is Not Enough, but I also do see the merits of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So I wouldn't complain if it was just below Secret Service, above Thunderball.
That would be giving it the credit for its story, but then understanding its shortcomings in, how it's put together and certain questions you might have.
Most critics are going to throw this movie in the dumpster of the bottom next to You Only Live Twice, and I don't
next to Mathis.
Next to they're going to throw this movie. Most people would throw this movie in the dumpster with Mathis, and You Only Live Twice, and some other movies we haven't talked about. But I think that if your whole goal tonight was to say this movie's underrated, putting it under Majesty's Secret Service would prove that point. So my biggest takeaway is just memorability for this film is how memorable this movie is and how it leaves you after you see it, and then do you feel entertained? I feel like it just does not check that box, and I feel like it's a very important box that maybe we should think about when we watch movies.
It is forgettable, to be fair.
Again, you have to have homework to see this movie because you're going to get lost if you don't see Casino, and that's the only it's really the only one.
I think the conclusion here is this. Quantum of Solace, as I said at the outset, is a criminally
These two men, they poured a whole bottle of bourbon into me.
Criminally underrated, or as QWERTY put it, overhated Bond movie. It's almost like AJ said. He's like, what's the point? And my point would be, well, it's the chaser after that shot of Casino. And others might say, if you're a man, you don't need a goddamn chaser.
No, they didn't give me a chaser.
That, yes, depends on an entire other film for it to make sense. So I don't think that's Quantum's fault, but here's the deal. Here's the real killer for me. It's not so much that Quantum requires watching Casino Royale because it's a sequel, so who cares? That's like saying Return of the King sucks because you have to watch Towers and Fellowship. However, Return of the King doesn't mess with the previous films. It builds on them without negatively affecting them. Unfortunately, you can't say the same thing about Quantum. The two characters affected most by this movie are Vesper and Mathis. The whole thing about Casino is that Vesper is going through hell. She's being blackmailed into sabotaging Bond, or else Quantum will kill her boyfriend. The assumption that we as an audience have is that her boyfriend is a good man. Good enough that A, Vesper would fall in love with him, and B, that she would do whatever it takes to save his life. Quantum changes that, showing us that he's actually just some dickhead who uses the same necklace routine every time he needs to get in with a new chick.
I figured out what that is. It's an Algerian love knot.
Really?
Thought it was just something pretty.
No, you didn't. Someone gave that to you. He's a very lucky man. He gave it to a friend of mine. Someone very close to me.
This works by the time we get to the Canadian chick because she seems nice and innocent and has this sweet little moment where she thanks Bond. But then when you go back and watch Casino, it's just not the same. Unfortunately, it kind of makes Vesper seem a little dumber and more gullible when her character always seemed better than that. It undermines the sacrifice she makes. Under the assumption that her boyfriend was a good man, it makes her kind of noble that she'd try to save his life, and it adds to her being torn between her love for him and her new love for Bond.
You stopped wearing the necklace.
Yeah. It was time.
But once we find out it's just this douchebag, it cheapens all of that and just makes her seem stupid for falling for some asshole. Then there's Mathis. We mentioned in the Casino Royale episode that at the moment when Le Chiffre says,
I'm afraid your friend Mathis is really my friend Mathis,
that he was deliberately lying to take suspicion away from the real traitor Vesper. But admittedly, we said that knowing that Mathis was innocent because we'd seen Quantum before. We had to approach the story this way, knowing the canon, breaking our rule of trying to watch these films in a vacuum, but for good reason. However, Quantum officially declaring Mathis innocent does still serve to confuse the plot of Casino. It makes you question why Le Chiffre would lie. Again, we submitted that in all likelihood, Mr. White planned it all out that way in order to simultaneously make Vesper appear innocent while separating Bond from his only real ally. But Bond already suspected Mathis before the car chase.
Mathis needs me.
Mathis, my friend Mathis.
Which kind of makes sense based on what Bond later says on the beach.
Remember I told you about Le Chiffre's tell? Well, Mathis told Le Chiffre. That's how he wiped me out.
I can't believe it.
Well, neither could I.
But also doesn't make sense and just comes across as bad adaptive screenwriting. This is because if you've read the Casino Royale book, this whole moment makes a lot more sense because Le Chiffre forges a note to Vesper signed with Mathis's name to lure her into a position where she could be kidnapped so that he could use her as a means of baiting Bond. In the movie, she claims to get a text message from Mathis asking to see her, and then on cue, Bond gets suspicious and runs outside. What if Bond had just kept sitting there eating his victory dinner? Would Vesper still have been kidnapped? How did the bad guys know that Vesper telling Bond that Mathis needed her would prompt him to run outside to witness her kidnapping firsthand so he'd give chase and then crash so Le Chiffre could smack his balls? If it's still a possibility that Mathis was guilty, then all of this could potentially work, but once you know he's innocent, none of this shit makes sense. Mathis is completely innocent in the book, and Bond knows it. But in the film, Le Chiffre takes it a step further by directly stating that Mathis is working for him, which is confusing. Why exactly does he feel the need to lie about it? Because for all Le Chiffre knew, he was just going to torture and kill Bond anyway, so what was the point of that charade?
Give me the password, and I would at least let her live.
Oh, I guess so he could trick Bond into giving up the password for her sake. But Bond never once suspected Vesper, so what was the point of lying about Mathis? It only makes sense if you accept the fact that Mr. White probably planned it all out that way and was using Le Chiffre as a tool. But we don't know that for a fact, so it just makes it all the more confusing. I said in the Casino episode that Mr. White would have needed to have told Le Chiffre to tell Bond that lie so that once Mr. White rescued Bond from the torture scene, Vesper would be able to coax the password out of him. But couldn't they have done all of that anyway? Couldn't Vesper still have put in the alternative bank account and stolen the money from under Bond's nose without the unnecessary messiness of going through a torture scene? And what would have happened if Bond hadn't immediately had Mathis taken in? What if he had confronted Mathis about it and Mathis had proof of his innocence? They bought him a villa a short time later, so clearly something eventually pointed to his innocence. My point is that the vagueness of his guilt or innocence leads to interesting discussion about Casino's plot, but knowing he's innocent reveals it all to just be bad adaptive screenwriting. This all would have worked just fine if Quantum had never brought Mathis back into the plot and officially labeled him innocent. That's not to say that it doesn't ultimately work, but it does make it more confusing. Keeping it vague was more effective.
Well, at least this clears Mathis.
No.
No?
No.
Admittedly, all of this nitpicking would have been easily forgiven if Mathis had been brought back into the plot to actually do something. Mathis's use in this story is annoyingly limited. Bond takes him away from his sexy Italian chica and his seaside villa for what? Just to get Bond to Bolivia? Bond already showed he can cross international borders without a passport, so what did he need Mathis for? If he couldn't have stolen a plane and flown himself there, or forged his own passport, he could have hit up Felix Leiter, who could have used some more screen time anyway. Bond asks him who the people from the opera are, but Tanner already did that, so what did he need Mathis for? Mathis gets him hooked up with the Bolivian police, who then betray them 5 minutes later. So what did he need Mathis for? I guess we needed him to remind Bond a few times that Vesper loved him.
I think she loved you.
She gave everything for you.
But this doesn't make sense either. QWERTY Manor is totally correct. Why does Mathis care so much about the relationship?
How's our girl? Melted your cold heart yet?
He was cute about it in Casino Royale, but that was before he was tortured and anally raped. His constant dialogue about Vesper is ham-fisted and kinda dumb considering the fact that her betrayal led to his being tortured and imprisoned. He should be just as pissed off with her as he is with Bond.
We forgive each other.
Forgive each other? What did you ever do to Bond? Mathis only ever aided Bond, but Mathis himself has been betrayed, tortured, imprisoned, taken from his girl and villa to do nothing but act as a travel agent, shot by crooked cops, pickpocketed and left for dead in a fucking dumpster. Nobody in this franchise has ever been shit on more times than poor fucking Rene Mathis, and he's asking Bond for forgiveness?
I think retirement suits you.
Then leave him alone. Just leave him be, Bond, James Bond, you piece of shit. You've already done enough to this man.
He wouldn't care. Come to apologize.
We forgive each other.
He wouldn't care.
Hey, Bond, I heard your testicles got shattered. Here's some medicine for your balls.
Fuck you.
Give yourself. We forgive each other. Being dead doesn't mean we'll seriously have.
All in all, Mathis should have either done more to serve the plot or he should have been allowed to stay home with his babe. He's one of the most gentlemanly and likable Bond allies we've ever had, and yet he gets shit on repeatedly and then literally thrown in the... This is the opposite of Draco in OHMSS, who is just as gentlemanly and cool, but actually helps Bond to do things and ultimately aids in storming Blofeld's mountaintop compound to save the world and get the girl. In Quantum, Bond pulls the one-man army thing and just runs in guns blazing.
You and I had a mutual friend.
Can you imagine if Mathis had used his connections to lead a raid on the hotel? Maybe it wouldn't have fit the depressing mood of this particular film, but what an arc that would have been for the man Bond wrongfully imprisoned to turn around and save the day. Just thinking about it highlights the fact that Mathis ends up doing nothing in this movie but proving that Giancarlo Giannini is a great actor, but his character was underutilized and then literally... It's no surprise that our Lord and Savior Martin Campbell doesn't like this movie, because it retroactively fucks with Casino Royale in a way that sequels aren't supposed to, and for that sin against our Lord and Savior, we ultimately move to place it below OHMSS, which is an equally heavily flawed film. In fact, we are putting the most overrated film of the series just above the most underrated of the series, which sounds just about right. But again, we're all here to love Bond and not hate Bond. And so I think we've met the most fair sector, because that middle part of the list, below Dr. No but above Thunderball, are movies that are fun, enjoyable, action-packed, but the ones at the top of that have essential Bond elements.
Yeah.
And Quantum gets away from the essential Bond elements, and I appreciate that about it, but I understand why Secret Service, For Your Eyes Only, and A View to a Kill would surpass it, because those, at the end of the day, just like we said in the Casino episode, if it comes down to it, we are ranking Bond movies and not just action movies or just any old movies, but Bond movies. So Quantum gets its credit. We give it some credit where credit is due, but we keep it below classic Bond movies. Secret Service, For Your Eyes Only, Beauty Will Kill, World Is Not Enough, and ultimately Dr. No. So I think it's a fair place to put it. I think at this point we're all in agreement. Gentlemen, yes?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Locking it in. Number 13, Mr. Neil Jackson. Would you do us the honor of reading the sacred standings of the Bond films, please, sir?
My pleasure. I'm going to do it in reverse order just because it seems like it's the way it should be done. So in reverse order, we have at 22, we have You Only Live Twice. 21, Die Another Day. 20, Diamonds Are Forever. 19, Moonraker. 18, Live and Let Die, with the best soundtrack of any of the Bond movies. 17, The Living Daylights, which I loved. 16 is Octopussy, about as camp as you can get. 15, Tomorrow Never Dies. 14, we've got Thunderball. 13, Quantum of Solace. 12, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. 11, For Your Eyes Only. 10, A View to a Kill. Christopher Walken was incredible in that. 9, The World Is Not Enough. 8 is Dr. No. 7 is The Man with the Golden Gun. 6, The Spy Who Loved Me. 5, License to Kill. 4, From Russia with Love. 3, Goldfinger. 2, Casino Royale. And number 1, Driving a Tank, is GoldenEye.
Thank you so much. That was great. This would open a can of worms for another 6-hour discussion. But does any of this stick out as good or terrible to you at first glance?
The rankings?
Yeah, this list.
I mean, the classic ones are always going to be up there for me. I mean, The Man with the Golden Gun, Spy Who Loved Me, they're just incredible films. I loved A View to a Kill. I mean, A View to a Kill is kind of like the Bond era that I was growing up in and going to the cinemas and watching, and just Grace Jones in that, and Christopher Walken with his Zeppelin. So no, I kind of agree with that list. I mean, it makes me want to go back and watch a whole bunch of them again. I haven't seen these since they, in 25, 30 years.
Well,
So-
when you go back and watch, if you care to, watch them and then watch our episode and then, keep doing that alternating, we have a lot of fun. So we're overjoyed that you would join us on this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, I watched the Casino Royale one that you did, and it was a fantastic episode. You put it together so well, and there's so much fun stuff in there that you do. So yeah, you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much for being here. Normally we toast at the end of every episode, so I'm just going to give you a little toast off.
Is it a vodka?
I just have some whiskey in here.
I'm going to pretend I have whiskey in this coffee.
Neil, this is to you, sir. Thank you so much for helping us out and coming out here and telling us a little bit of Bond stories. So thank you so much, sir.
You're very welcome.
Cheers. I really feel like we increased the love amongst us this time, fellas.
I don't know why you feel that way. I hate you guys more than ever.
No, I really wish that we were in the same room, that I could reach out and touch you.
I think it's the whiskey talking. Or is it the spirit of Martine Campbell?
I appreciate giving Quantum its due. And speaking of which,
a lot of the things that we kept talking about left and right tonight were a lot about Marc Forster's choices in this film. The things that Charlie was like, oh, that was great choice. This is the great choice. And yeah, the editing's weird. Some people don't like it. But at the end of the day, he does make a lot of very purposeful choices. And I feel like he was dealt a bad hand, and he had to play that hand the best he could in weird circumstances. And what we got was not the worst fucking movie, despite what most people would say. But we're saying it's a better movie than what most people would say.
A lesser person would have, with this material, made a worse movie.
Yeah. We could have gotten a Octopussy.
We could have gotten another Tomorrow Never Dies, where it is just a rented director who ultimately doesn't care, but Marc Forster does care.
For somebody who has not done a lot of action movies, but somebody who is more of an actor's director, it's really cool to see someone who gets a chance to do more of an action film. Even if they fail, they still got to do it. So that's pretty cool.
The last time we raised a glass to Martine Campbell, I'll always pray to. But this time we raised to another director who it just goes to show. It's like some Cain and Abel stuff. He made the right sacrifices to get there, but then fate intervened in what he was trying to do. And so I can see through it. I can see what he really was trying to do. But we understand those shortcomings. That's why his movie meets the middle of the list. But he saved this movie from being at the bottom. And for that, we raise up a toast to Marc Forster.
To Marc.
To Marc.
To Marc. Cheers.